consequential one in history. And like, that's totally true. Because when was the last time a VP debate mattered at all? Slightly.
Doesn't matter now.
It doesn't. But that's the point. It is the most consequential debate. Oh, and by the way, we're live. In case people are wondering, they probably heard me in the middle of that conversation or in the middle of that remark. What I was basically just talking about is just the title of the stream about how it's the most consequential vice presidential debate in history. Which before I started this stream, I was actually watching like the first 15, 20 something minutes on Fox, their thing, and their showing of the VP debate, and their gaggle of commentators were saying that it's the most important, it's the most consequential vice presidential debate in history. I think even Bucker Barlson was saying the same thing on his show as well. And
Yeah,
I can't help but think that
somebody should put together a compilation of all the hosts saying that. Kind of like the threat to our democracy clip. Because from what I've seen, it is kind of almost like they all kind of word for word are saying the same thing. Like it's not just the same narrative. Which, by the way, typically, like news media they'll present different bits of information in order to give people, from a superficial perspective, the idea that they're promoting different perspectives, but everything that they're arguing fundamentally all conforms to the exact same narrative. State good, you need the state. The state is the strong man who will come and represent your interests. These couple actors are threats to you, to the U.S. government and your quote unquote national security. Therefore, we need the CIA to go in there and bring democracy to them. But yeah, in this case, it seems to be more or less even the exact same information, just like not even like barely changing the verbiage that they use to describe it, which doesn't happen too often. You know, usually they try and at least change up the information, even though it's like the same three narratives, no matter what story it is. Because if they didn't do that, more people would be able to put together the notion that they're being fed essentially an overload of bullshit.
Mm-hmm. And my thinking is that, well, insofar as the narrative is going to be this is the most important vice presidential debate in history, well, that's true, but only because it'll be the last vice presidential debate in history, at least in a time when elections could be said to have any consequence whatsoever. Because right now, I think we're at the point where we can say with reasonable confidence that the 2020 presidential election will go down in history as the last presidential election in American history. That's not to say that there won't be future presidential elections, much in the same way that there continued to be emperors of Rome following Rome 480 AD, which is historically recognized to be the end of the Roman Empire. There were still emperors, and in much the same way, there will still be presidents, there will still be presidential elections, but who wins these elections will ultimately just be a pop culture phenomenon, as consequential to people's lives as the question of who was the last winner of America's Got Talent. Sure, there'll be a lot of people who are emotionally invested into it, and a lot of people who are still going to conflate their interests, who are going to conflate their interests with the state as late as the 2030s, like long after the state went hollow. But we are entering the point where their ability to actually impact our lives is going to be virtually non-existent. So with this in mind, yeah, it's going to be this vice presidential debate is going to be hugely consequential compared to other vice presidential debates. And really, the only way I can say that is because previous vice presidential debates were utterly inconsequential whatsoever, whereas this one will be upgraded to minor footnote in history.
Yeah, and just what I was going to say about that, because I was talking about media narratives earlier. From what I've been able to tell, I was planning on actually. Well, I say this about most things that I talk about at this point, but I was planning on actually writing about this eventually because it's actually something that's pretty important. But at any given moment, and I suppose the only thing really stopping me is I'm not entirely sure that I have sort of a complete understanding of the media narratives. But at any given moment, I've looked back at like the last 100 years of broadcasting in state media, and I've even seen bits from the 19th century. But at any given moment, there are three stories being run by every single sort of licensed FTC, FCC approved media outlet. Uh, the election, so your political affiliation is good, and that you need, and the other side is trying to corrupt the state and trying to subvert our democracy, and you need to take a stronger stance in your support for that affiliation, because if you don't, the other guys are going to subvert the Constitution or whatever. It doesn't matter. It's like what side we're talking about is not important, because Democrat or Republican, even back when it was Whigs versus Democratic Republicans, you can see this narrative thriving. But it's like the media outlets attempt to target themselves towards different political affiliations. Obviously, like MSNBC tries to use the talking points of the people who would identify with Democrat political affiliations, likewise with Fox. Regardless of what outlet you're listening to, that's always the narrative that they're pushing. If it's a Democrat outlet, it's the Republicans who are trying to subvert the Constitution, and you needing the Democrat Party and you needing them to push their policy agenda in through the state in order to protect your interests, and vice versa. There's a war going on or some sort of foreign espionage, and therefore you need the state to swoop in and be a strong man to protect you from it. You see this right now with China, for instance, and the marketing for trade embargoes and tariffs, when in reality the problem is caused by the state itself. Obviously, I think that goes without saying, and the various cartels that the states have propped up around the world. And the third narrative being pushed at any given time is also that there's an election coming up. And even when there's not an election going on, the election narrative is still being pushed, because that's how people are sort of locked into this political game. And you could look throughout history, and without exception, regardless of what story it is, regardless of what period of time it is, and regardless of what the subject that state media is talking about it is pertaining to, the narrative of that particular story will always conform to one or more of those three points, one of those three arguments.
Yeah, I don't really have much to add to that, save that I'm just watching the chat right now, and there's a lot of contempt that people are displaying for the concept of booting in general, which is very good. And a lot of people are asking if they've been getting spammed either by text, by ads, or what have you, trying to get them to vote. Hey, did you remember to register to vote today? Don't forget to. Have you heard the good news of our Lord and Savior democracy?
Yeah, it's very interesting how it doesn't seem to matter like what exactly you're looking at, like what advertisement you're looking at. Election seasons kind of push the idea of voting in the same way that the state has been mass promoting social distancing and COOF related stuff this year. around the last 2 months of election seasons, but they never tell you specifically who to vote for or what to vote for. They just want you to vote. Now, one has to ask why exactly that is. You know, if we were to believe the sort of what the state's interpretation of these of these political power dynamics that exist in society are, you'd think that like certain groups would be telling you to vote Democrat. You know, if these political affiliations had different interests from one another, and these political actors were like in bed with those parties. You know, you'd think that they would be making that more clear. But no, all they seem to really be concerned with is just voting. Now, the reason why that is the case is because they don't care about policy agendas. Policy agendas is essentially just their way of advertising, the mass advertising the state and the state's influence over society, which of course we know, regardless of what the state does, will always be the exact same thing: coercion and the suppression of resources in order to try and in order to try and engineer social incentives and create situations of dependence upon them. Well, that seems to be what the interests of these politically partnered organizations are as well. Seems that they just want you to. It doesn't. They're not advertising specific policy agendas. They're just advertising voting itself. And I think that, I've seen a lot of people try and explain that away from like the statist take on these political dynamics, where they will say, oh, well, they're not saying that they want you to vote for this party or that party, but that's what they mean, which is not an argument. That's just you projecting your interpretation of these political incentives onto the organization by using gray areas and inserting information into these gray areas that wasn't there as a way to try and conform to your worldview.
And I've been seeing this in other forms too. Like I've been seeing people sharing around memes. This one really struck out to me a couple days ago on another Discord server. There's like this demon dog in a tutu, and the message just goes like, "Are like good doggo Fluffles is asking why you haven't registered to vote yet," and something dumb like that. And the fact that it's a demon dog, which aka a Chihuahua, kind of undermines the point that they're trying to make. But it's still another example. There's the South Park meme from 2004, "Vote or Die." Pretty sure you remember that, where they outright made it. They outright made a parody of a. They made parody reality with a lot of black activists and a lot of black rappers unironically wearing "Vote or Die" T-shirts. Not to mention that just I think today, possibly yesterday, there was this compilation video of celebrities, including or who were allegedly naked, and did like this whole Instagram virtue signaling thing about "I'm naked to tell you about voting and why you should vote." And here's the thing: no one wants to see Sarah Silverman or Amy Schumer topless. I'm just saying, but they did that anyway, all to try to get people to register to vote. Not, of course, as you said earlier, to try to tell them to vote one way or the other, but just to simply get them to vote. And it should at least raise people's alarm or raise people's red flags about how insistent they are just to simply get people to vote. What this tells me, or at least what this tells me, is that they're considering people who aren't voting to be an actual threat to the state, which is hardly surprising because I remember seeing a poll a couple months ago about people who aren't voting, them being asked why they aren't voting, and typically the main conventional opinion in regards to why non-voters don't vote is because, well, they're undecided. They just need to be persuaded one way or the other. And yeah, those people do exist, but the overwhelming majority of people who say they aren't voting already for the 2020 presidential election is that they just don't believe that any one of them is going to serve their interest. They're, for all intents and purposes, disenfranchised. Not that they were ever going to be franchised in the first place, but at least their perception of the state has matched up with the reality. And I
Or
think,
another one that you hear pretty commonly, because that's the one constant with all of these attempts by state media to represent why people wouldn't want to vote. You never hear real arguments, or you never hear sort of the anti-political position. That's literally inconceivable to them. It's not that it's inconceivable, it's that if they were to even suggest that anti-politics was a thing to their audience, I think that that would lead to a lot of people becoming agorists, because that their whole the structure of their argument fundamentally relies upon the idea that societies are defined by legislative fiat. So the only two options are literally vote or become someone else's slave, effectively.
mhm. Now, which is funny, like I said something like this in the Discord server about how democracy is basically just warfare, or basically just civil war, but by proxy. About how the results of a democracy are meant to simulate what the results would be if those factions came to open warfare. In insofar as the infrastructure, the numbers necessary to win the election, assuming we take elections at face value as to how they function, would accurately simulate what would happen if those two organizations or those two factions declared open war upon one another. The difference is that the lying sociopaths who are in charge of those factions, the party leaders, the party bosses, the bureaucrats, the politicians, just the members of the ruling class in general, they don't get to lose their taxed livestock from being casualties of war if the results of the war can be simulated through democracy. Ultimately, like
But
I can see, I think I can start from this point of view. I can start to understand. And sorry if I cut you off there, but I wasn't quite
that's fine.
finished. But I can start to undersee why I can start to understand why a lot of media personalities and the like are so frickin' interested in making sure to maintain the illusion of democracy, because they are fundamentally incapable of conceiving social organization except politically, and they earnestly believe that if we can't simulate warfare in order to get different people's agendas pushed through the political ruling class, then we'll just have actual open warfare.
Well, I'm not even sure that that's the case. I think that a lot of them, like I was suggesting earlier, are aware of the fact that the anti-political position exists. The state, at the very least, is, the actual state class, the people running the government, are at the very least aware of this. That's why the Mulford Act was signed in California, and why the National Guard cracked down on the cop watch patrols back in the 70s, and how essentially since the 90s, these organizations like the Cajun Navy or Food Not Bombs have been trying to provide charity in the event of natural disasters, or just to homeless people living in urban centers. And as we've covered in past streams, the FEMA comes in and kicks these groups out with a threat of violence in the case of the Cajun Navy. And in the case of these like libertarian mutual aid charity services in the inner cities, they've literally gone as far as to pour bleach onto their food in order to make sure that the people they're trying to serve can't associate with them. and that's ultimately what it is. It's not that they want people. It's not that these people genuinely think. Maybe some of the more like bubble-headed celebrities that are only interested in becoming rich and are narcissistic with their heads up their own ass and want to be famous. Those people just sort of go along with whatever their agents tell you, but the actual people pulling the strings and the actual people who are deciding what the state does, they know full well that people can associate independently from the state and can subvert the state. That's why the state spends an exorbitant amount of resources on trying to make sure that that can't happen, or that people in mass don't ever realize that all they have to do is set up an infrastructure that's designed to make these sort of counter economic trades, decentralized defense services, or local banks, or just associating with cryptocurrencies through like digital non-proprietary networks. All people would have to do is start doing that, and the state would completely lose all their ability to control supply chains, finances, and even the people themselves. So at this point, what we're seeing in recent years, especially by recent years, I mean the last couple of decades, is the state spending a lot more resources than they would previously on just trying to keep their tax cattle in line, trying to make sure they never realize that, or it's not just that they did never realize, but they never actually act. Like they always associate a greater sense of risk with disobeying and associating in the counter market than they do working a wage slave job and going to college and laying your life down for the political economy in the state.
All right. Now back to the vice presidential debate. Just circling back here. Uh, we're going to be going over the latter part of the debate. I haven't watched this part, so I don't know what's in there. And I only skipped like an hour into the vice presidential debate, so I don't know where we are. I don't know what the context is. I don't know what they're talking about. And quite frankly, that really silly image of Pence on screen that you can see, where he looks like he's really constipated, that was entirely unintentional, I promise.
But before we start, we didn't really comment on the presidential debate itself. And all that I really wanted to say on that matter, I wasn't going to get into it much because there's really not a whole lot to say. But I thought that it was kind of funny that there was this prevailing talking point throughout the debate where Trump is the Trump administration's response to the COVID pandemic, which was manufactured by the U.S. and Chinese government, was that of the free market position, which I think is amusing because that was being portrayed both as if it's a bad thing and also as though that's even remotely true.
I mean, my opinion of that whole thing was just it was an absolute crap show. Everyone was talking over each other. It was obnoxious to listen to. Everyone from Trump to the dementia patient to the other dementia patient who was the moderator. They were Everyone was just obnoxious, and honestly, it was barely even worth listening to. However, there was one part of the debate that I thought was interesting, and that is when Biden just randomly took the time to just look at the camera and just say, "Vote, please vote." He did actually do that, and I thought it was absolutely hilarious. And then Trump started talking over him to the point where Trump or Biden just had to say, "Just shut up, man." That actually that actually did make me laugh. Although it does showcase like the extent to which, well, the politics has just become an absolute crap show, and it's so ubiquitous in people's lives that people have no choice but to really become exposed to it.
Well,
So
it's gotten to the point. It's gotten to the point where, as I was talking about earlier, the state tries to manufacture a sense of risk associated with counter economizing and operating outside of the political market or the state services. Well, it's gotten to the point where the only way to do that at this point is to just sort of manufacture the social, or at least attempt to manufacture the social dynamics of George Orwell's 1984, where you're taught that everybody who has different interests than you is just expressly your enemy. That the state is your only friend. That the state is just the literally, like, not, you can't even go out and get a job in the white market almost anymore. That's not enough, according to the state's narrative. Like, like, literally, the state is your nanny, and the only way to stop, and your nanny will be abusive to you unless you vote, and unless your party wins, because the other party is just some evil demonic force, and everyone who associates with them literally wants to rape your children and behead you. And it's kind of insane to watch, really.
it's insane, but it's also very typical because it's the end conclusion of open warfare between other factions. You have to use violence and coercion against your enemies, otherwise they'll use violence and coercion against you. It's exactly what I was talking about earlier with democracy just being open warfare by proxy, where nobody, or at least very few people, have to actually die. So
It's
it's
very
hardly
typical.
surprising. I'm just going to remark that it's hardly surprising that people treat democratic elections as though it were war.
It's very typical of dying states, or states which are entirely dependent upon, like, handouts by other states, and are just could crumble at any time. Like, if you look at the Soviet Union, for instance, the 70s and the 80s, they definitely helped manufacture that sort of Cold War narrative, and it was even more insane there. We've talked about how, it's been described that we really need to do, like, a special about Soviet state media circa the 1980s, just to showcase how insane Soviet state media would have been at the time. But this is essentially what it was like. Constantly, there were American subversives setting up counter economies, when in reality it was just people trying to sustain a living for themselves. And you needed to report them to the KGB, and you needed to go against your own neighbors, because the General Commissariat and the Soviet Communist Party are the only people who know what your interests are. Comrade Gorbachev will take care of you, but your neighbors and the people actually in your community who you're associating with, they're the ones who are gonna stab you in the back and are gonna destroy everything you have. You can see this in North Korea too, which, for those of you who don't know, is, well, everybody knows what North Korea is, but what most people don't know is that its political economy is non-existent, and it's pretty much just a proxy state propped up by Russia and China as a way to keep their southern border from being encircled by a NATO ally. Um, but if you look at North Korean propaganda, it's just constantly that. Look out for the American and Japanese imperialists trying to take over North Korea and kill you and make you their slaves.
Hmm.
So this is very typical of dying states, or states which just don't even have the pretense of having anything to offer in terms of an infrastructure. for people to trade around.
All right. Now, anyways, I think we should get started in this debate thing.
Yeah, that's fair.
All right. So I'm just gonna. I don't know where we are, but from what I can tell, it's gonna be Pence talking. He's probably complaining about his stuffed up colon, how he hasn't been able to been able to use the toilet in 7 days, while
Because
Harris
gay
is
people.
Harris is just smirking amused, knowing that she had something to do with that.
Pence bragging about how many gay people he's electrocuted, while Kamala Harris is bragging about how many gay people she wants to put to death.
I think it's more along the lines of Mike Pence is bragging about his death count, while Harris is just smirking to herself, knowing that hers is far higher.
that's a good one.
Anyways, I'm just gonna let's get going. This is just gonna be a crap show.
Look, Susan, first and foremost, China is to blame for the coronavirus. And President Trump is not.
Hold on a second. When I started watching this, it was like the first 15 minutes of the debate. They were doing nothing but talking about the coronavirus, and it's 1 hour in, and they're still talking about it.
Wow.
I mean,
If I wanted to hear about the if I wanted to hear about the coronavirus, I would just go to sleep so that I could do anything other than hear about the coronavirus. But yeah, that's kind of pathetic, honestly.
I mean, it was exactly what we were talking about before. How every totalitarian regime on the face of the planet, I would put the United States in that, or at least authoritarian ones, they like to put up this great and grand threat to justify the authority that they exercise over the people and to justify their victimization over their rights. In the Soviet Union, especially in the Soviet era, it was subversives and fascists. In the Gorbachev era, it was the subversives. In North Korea, it's the Japanese and American imperialists, and now in the United States, it's the coronavirus. And so it's
I want
very
to
telling
trigger.
that this is the main thing that they've been talking about, and it's even gotten so far as to become a talking point for one of the two parties to use against the other. That one didn't do enough to combat this threat. No, you see, it's your party whose central plan is actually identical to ours. So you're engaging in plagiarism.
I want to trigger Stalinists.
How?
Bring up the Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact. I think that's what it's called. The Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact, and how the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany were basically allies for the first 2 years of World War II.
Oh, I bet that'll just make their heads explode.
Or the Tambov Revolt, which for those of you who've never heard of that, basically a bunch of Soviet gulag workers tried to pull a strike in one of the gulags in Siberia, and the Soviet government responded by throwing them into gas chambers.
Yeah, that seems like they operate on the interests of the worker, don't they? Yeah, they sound like perfectly nice and reasonable guys. Anyways, let's see what else Pence has to say.
Happy about it. He's made that very clear. Made it clear again today.
There's echo on your end.
There is?
Yeah.
Well, there shouldn't be, because hold on a minute. All right, try playing it now.
All right, one sec.
China and the World Health Organization.
Yep. Okay. I can hear. I can
They did
understand
not
why.
let our personnel into China
Hold
get
on.
information on the coronavirus until the.
We good?
I think that I'm just gonna have to mute myself whenever we're playing the video.
I mean, I was just playing it not long ago, and I wasn't getting any echo on your end.
Well, now for whatever reason, my speakers are like playing the video, but at the same time, like I have my headphones in, so I don't know what we're gonna be able to do about that.
You're gonna want to right-click your audio thing on the taskbar and set your audio systems to play through your headphones. So basically, just play with your audio settings for a bit. I'm gonna hit play.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's set to play through my headphones, so shouldn't be doing that.
We'll just see how it goes right now.
Middle of February. Fortunately, President Trump, in dealing with China from the outset of this administration, standing up to China that had been taking advantage of America for decades in the wake of Joe Biden's cheerleading for China, President Trump made that decision before the end of January to suspend all travel from China. And again, the American people deserve to know Joe Biden opposed President Trump's decision to suspend all travel from China. He said it was hysterical. He said it was
Thank you, Vice
xenophobic.
President Pence.
But President Trump has
Vice
stood
President Pence,
up
your
to
time is
China.
up.
We're going to continue to stand strong.
Thank you, Vice President Pence.
We want to improve the relationship, but we're going to level the playing field, and we're going to hold
Vice President
China
Pence.
accountable for what they did to America with the coronavirus.
Thank you.
You mean what America did to America with the coronavirus?
Yeah, for those of you who don't know, it is true that the coronavirus leaked from a lab in Wuhan, but it's it was pretty uncontroversially reported back earlier this year that in the biogenetics lab, I think I'm probably butchering that, but there was a lab dealing with genetic engineering in Harvard University that was being funded by the U.S. government, and Chinese spies, quote unquote, were involved in that project for 5 years. And the official narrative is that the U.S. government didn't know that they were Chinese spies. But then, the Canadian government was also involved in funding that specific project, and the Canadian government did actually have knowledge that of what was being manufactured in Wuhan, as in the Canadian government actually had scientists working in Wuhan. So I find that very difficult to believe, aside from just how long the U.S. government was funding the project. Yeah, long story short, there's a significant amount of evidence to suggest that the coronavirus was manufactured was the product of a joint partnership between the Chinese, U.S., and Canadian governments. So this narrative that it was Chinese biological warfare against the United States is complete bullshit.
And we know sorry.
It's a distraction. It's a distraction narrative.
Mm-hmm. It's entirely like this whole. Since the beginning, this was a watch the other hand moment, but it's been going on for so long that it really wasn't a watch the other hand. It was watch the hand of everyone in the crowd, and it's kind of been going on nonstop, and it's gotten wall-to-wall coverage on mainstream and second-stream media for a long-ass time. And you can see right here, it's all that they can really talk about, because a lot of the issues that are actually important are actually going to bring attention to the extent to which a state is a predatory agency against their own people, or at least the subjects that they claim to be their own people. And we know for absolute certainty that the virus was manufactured because in its DNA and its protein structures contain components that would not occur in nature randomly, no matter how often it would mutate. The probability of a coronavirus spontaneously mutating the same protein in HIV, that not just the same protein, but the identical protein to HIV, the one that makes it immunosuppressant, is non-existent. There are more atoms in the universe than there is the odds of this randomly mutating.
But specifically, what this has been a distraction from is the fact that the political economy, so the licensed actors, the ones that are operating around the fiat issued by central banks and these trade cartels around the world, is literally collapsing to the point where recently we saw that like checks issued by the Department of Labor are starting to bounce. The central bank has effectively been has been doing everything that it can to not operate on negative interest rates. It's been at 0% interest rates for the last couple months, and in order to sustain that, the government has had to call back the $1,200 loans they've been issuing out that were supposed to be subsidies for people who couldn't work during COVID, and that's exactly what the shutdown, quote unquote, was intended to do. Which, by the way, you'll notice that it doesn't seem to affect organizations which are the most politically connected with the state. Like Walmart, McDonald's, Taco Bell, all these corporations that have a significant amount of leverage in the political market, they seem to be able to stay open as long or much longer than other stores. They seem to, their prices don't seem to be as affected, even though everybody else's are. So, makes you thonk a little bit. No, the reason why the state has been suppressing the hours of operation or the supply chains of most like local stores or smaller corporate chains is to try and suppress the tens of billions of dollars that they've printed worth of new dollar bills to try and stop them from entering the market in order to try and sort of prolong the inevitable Great Depression 2.0 that they've created.
I've been saying for over a year now that a large part of what the government does and what their actions reflect is not merely a rapacious desire to increase their size and power and authority, but they simply can't do that anymore. And now they've run out their limits, so now they're just motivated entirely by keeping the lights on for another 5 minutes. What's interesting is that what you need to do to get negative interest rates, at least according to modern monetary theory, which is, of course, the neo-Keynesian Marxist political or economic philosophy that is becoming mainstream nowadays. What is required before you can get to negative interest rates is a way to tax pensions, which is to say, once 401ks, once Roth IRAs, which are, of course, financial instruments that you can use to bypass taxation and thus be able to have a certain amount of money put away that is exempt from taxation, and thus you're able to get more money in interest. It's a whole thing I'm not really going to go into, mostly because I don't understand it myself all that well. But the point is that you have financial once those retirements, those pensions, those financial instruments that allow people to retire start to be taxed, you have an ability to essentially fund negative interest rates. Now, what's interesting about the interest rates nowadays is that they've been teetering around zero and actually at zero for a very long time. Whereas I want to take everyone back in time a bit to the 2000s, which following the dot-com bubble collapse around 1999, 2000, there was a recession that was immediately fixed by following Paul Krugman's advice of inflating a housing bubble. Now, they didn't literally follow his advice, but it's kind of funny how that kind of ended up happening. But what part of what they did, among other things, was to lower the interest rate. They lowered the interest rate from 5% to 2% to 1%. And this would be around the years 2004 and 2005, which was around the time that a lot of neo-Keynesians were saying that we were entering a time of permanent prosperity. Suffice to say, things were going extremely well economically. Houses were very valuable. People were coming out of college just able to make a crap ton of money just by buying houses and then selling them unchanged at a higher value than what they purchased them for. It was just generally like general prosperity. And then as almost as soon as interest rates started to climb up again, because even the Fed at the time understood that they couldn't keep low interest rates forever because it would result in inflation. Almost immediately after they started raising it again, there was, well, we got the 2008 financial crash. And what's funny now is that we've been in a significant economic recession largely since 2008. At best, we've had very stagnant growth. And now, like, we're still in a recession, even though interest rates are far lower than they were during the 2000s housing boom. So, what does that say about the mechanisms by which a state is able to maintain the economy anymore? And of course, the
Well, the
state
truth,
wants the economy to prosper in general because a prospering economy means more resources to tax. But they can't do that anymore, at least not without getting into negative interest rates. And even then, it's questionable if negative interest rates would work at all. Well, I mean, we know they won't work, but they're still going to try.
the truth is that essentially, as long as there's been a political economy, we've been in a recession. Hot take, but now the way that political economies sustain themselves is essentially just especially in like market-based state societies. It's a multi-layer facet of central planners. You have the financial central planners, you have the supply chain central planners, you have the licensing central planners. You basically people who dictate on multiple levels, generally how resources are distributed and who is able to trade them and who is able to produce and how they're able to do so. And they do this usually not by direct fiat, though if push comes to shove, they will use direct threats of violence. They generally do this through layers of indirect financial manipulation and supply chain manipulation. But at the end of those supply chains and financial chains is a threat of violence somewhere being issued by one of these state cartels, either backed by the state or issued by the state itself. And and this is just because when you have proprietary interest rates, or when you have these organizations which are only able to scale upwards and have the amount of resources and the market share that they do because the state is externalizing their maintenance costs onto other actors in society. A problem that emerges because of this is the fact that there are people who are allocating resources around the impression that more resources exist or less resources exist than actually do exist. If you have this sort of top-down central plan financial manipulation, then the interest rates never actually reflect the interest rates of the people who are spending and who are actually trading. So, it would be fair to characterize that as a type of central planning. And likewise with these organizations like the World Trade Organization, the supply chains are completely monopolized in the partner states that the WTO is associated with, and the way, especially with like the less influential states that are sort of at the mercy of states like China and the United States. They nationalize certain parts of their land in order to essentially contract out to certain multinational corporations, and then because those are political partners, they're essentially able to decide who gets the supplies mined out of those areas or harvested from those areas. So they can decide who produces what to very shockingly consistent standard. And just what I was going to say from there is that as a result, you never really have any sort of sustainability or consistency. You just have people trading around the idea that more production is occurring than there actually is. There's just, these resources exist on paper, but they don't actually exist to a large extent. And as a result, there's sort of a constant state of what is functionally a recession going on, at least in the political market. Now, as for what you were talking about earlier with modern monetary theory, their theory on interest rates is bonkers, and really we probably should talk about modern monetary theory pretty soon here. But basically, it's the money multiplier argument, but applied to like the rate of interest itself, which doesn't make any sense. If you shift all this money around and these investment banks it sends money to other investment banks and then they sort of circle it around to the original investment banks, well, you'll increase GDP that way, and therefore you'll increase prosperity.
It's the same Keynesian nonsense as you get it's like getting a blood transfusion from your arm.
Yeah.
It's not actually going to help you. And in fact, the matter is you'll lose blood inside of the tech. So
I do find it pretty amusing how like even within state academia, they're trying to sort of distance themselves from Keynesianism because of how thoroughly Keynes's ideas have been discredited. Even though what they're transitioning into is like an unholy synthesis between Marxism and Keynesianism, which I don't think a lot of people have pointed out. But modern monetary theory, it advances the ideas of like charterism, for instance, the notion that money only exists because the state creates it, or that there are certain economic classes. That idea is very much alive in modern monetary theory to lesser extent, but it's present, which is the reason why you see people like non-compete shilling for modern monetary theory, because it's essentially like it is the final state shill doctrine.
And I think it's their last chance. It's the only way they can keep the lights on for another 5 minutes, or at the very least justify it. It's do or die. And let's be honest, it's going to just die. Anyways, let's. I think we should go on to the stream because we've kind of been going on this topic for a good amount of time.
I was just going to say one last thing. Because modern monetary theory pushes the notion that things like money or investments can only exist by state fiat, that functionally wouldn't even make it a study of economics, because it's not an explanation of like how people trade or even an attempt to explain that. It is just, I think I said that twice, but it's just essentially a very thinly veiled argument for you need the state good. It's pretty pathetic how they've really just dropped all pretense of trying to push economic theory and are just peddling state propaganda at this point. I mean, Keynesianism was state propaganda. Any sort of like positivist econ is state propaganda, but it is not even econ anymore.
I think modern monetary theory deserves its own special video on the public. I don't know if it's going to be on the scale of the Hoppian collab, but something as extensive, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
But
Anyway,
let's
we'll get back to
continue.
the debate.
Yeah, our people in our audience will want us to get back to that, so let's go.
Thank you.
All right.
Harris, let me ask you the same question that I asked the Vice President. How would you describe our fundamental relationship with China? Are we competitors, adversaries, enemies? You'll have 2 minutes uninterrupted.
Susan, the Trump administration's perspective and approach to China has resulted in the loss of American lives, American jobs, and America's standing. There's a weird obsession that President Trump has had with getting rid of whatever accomplishment was achieved by President Obama and Vice President Biden. For example, they created within the White House an office that basically was responsible for monitoring pandemics. They got rid of it.
Not true.
There was a team of disease experts that President Obama and Vice President Biden dispatched to China to monitor what is now predictable and what might happen. They pulled them out. We now are looking at 210,000 Americans who have lost their lives. Let's look at the job situation. We mentioned before the trade deal, the trade war, they wanted to call it, with China. It resulted in the loss of over 300 manufacturing jobs and a manufacturing recession, and the American consumer paying thousands of dollars more for goods because of that failed war that they called it. Then let's talk about standing. Pew, a reputable research firm, has done an analysis that shows that leaders of all of our formerly allied countries have now decided that they hold in greater esteem and respect Xi Jinping, the head of the Chinese Communist Party, than they do Donald Trump, the President of the United States, the Commander-in-Chief of the United States. This is where we are today because of a failure of leadership by this administration.
Senator Harris, we've seen change.
Yeah, where do we start?
Well, basically, I've been linking a series of articles to Heretics specifically in Discord that I would appreciate him to like repost in the YouTube chat that explain essentially in great detail how the state, not just like by directly manufacturing the virus caused the pandemic, but to a large extent has suppressed the ability for people to try and experiment with ways to cure COVID, and the way in which the infrastructure of the political economy itself allows pandemics to spread more so than they would naturally be able to. One article is written by Kevin Carson and Center for a Stateless Society called Pandemics, the State as Cure or Cause. Second being from the Beesus Institute, titled COVID and the Escalation of Medical Tyranny by Tho Bishop. Both of which are pretty good articles, and we were covering earlier in this year sort of how this has been the case, how the state like has suppressed specific things that would allow people to like 3D print cures for COVID or treatments for COVID. Essentially, this is all a thinly veiled, even like aside from the financial manipulation going on behind the scenes, that this pandemic response, quote unquote, is just a thinly veiled excuse to try and perpetuate. This also has resulted, as you were referencing earlier, in what is very much a watch the other hand kind of moment. It's resulted in the state seizing essentially direct command influence over the pharmaceutical industry. like they have like a direct fascist relationship with the pharmaceutical industry, whereas previously they were just kind of indirectly manipulating the supply chains of said industry. Now the state is directly commanding these firms like Bayer, or what was that other one that has the patent on I forgot, the one that has the patent on that one drug that was proven to treat COVID-19, I think, and they ended up jacking up the price of it to like $3,000.
Oh, I don't remember. I know
But
that
yeah,
I know that Donald Trump has been touting or has been crediting his treatment to a drug called Regeneron, I think it's called, and that also that happens to be the name of the company. Which I don't know how much it costs, but I imagine it's going to be absolutely tremendous. And since Donald Trump has been touting them as being great and wonderful and perfect, their stock value has absolutely skyrocketed. However, I've been
so
trying, and I'm pretty certain they're also connected with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation.
I know that the one I was thinking of as well is associated with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, but again, I'm not entirely sure uh, what the name of that drug is off the top of my head. I know we were talking about it on Two Senses stream a couple months back, but basically the pharmaceutical industry has become sort of like directly planned by the state, which would explain would explain some of their practices for sure, since the COVID situation has started.
I mean, why wouldn't they be? I mean, just in order to get a drug onto the market, you need to go through the FDA, which requires 10 years of testing and billions of dollars worth of licensing fees and any sort of other things that might be required, in addition to the huge liability risk that putting a
Yeah,
drug on the market necessarily requires. So the capital required to even start these kinds of firms is absolutely outrageous, all as a result of government control, constraints, and patents that just make all this stuff completely unnecessary. Another good example of patents jacking up the price would be Mylan having a monopoly on EpiPens. You could have EpiPens imported from India for and have them available in the United States sold for $10 each. But because of Mylan having a monopoly, you can now get a 2-pack of EpiPens for $600.
Mylan was the one I was thinking of. Mylan was granted like a patent for this certain drug that was supposed to either cure or really help with COVID, and that resulted in it being jacked up to like $3,000 a pill. Another one that's been greatly, that hasn't been spoken a lot about in state media, but has been sort of has benefited greatly from this is Syngenta, which is a another favorite for people that like to talk about corporate globalization specifically. But basically, and there's sort of a reason you never hear about. Isn't it interesting how these firms are ones that you never hear about in any of these like state media outlets, even though they're some of the biggest political partners to state industry. As a matter of fact, the pharmaceutical industry is the state is even before now, where it's basically sort of a command corporatist model that it operates around in the U.S. Even before then, it's been sort of like the favorite industry of the state, because pharmaceutical the product of the pharmaceutical market's very easy to manipulate through legislative fiat. On top of that, it's because if you crack somebody over the head with a club, like the state that is basically the only answer that the state has for anything, to make people sick, to brutalize them, to deprive them of resources so that they're, put in undesirable situations and probably made sick. The drugs to cure that being more expensive and being issued by only a handful of the most politically partnered organizations, it benefits the state quite significantly to do that.
Mhm.
And that's the reason why I think they chose the COVID as the route to manipulate the market through, while they're trying to stop the total collapse, the total self-immolation of the financial system, because it sort of kills two birds with one stone. It gets people into a frenzied panic, thinking that they need the state now in order to protect them from this deadly pandemic. 0.02% mortality rate, LOL. But it also allows them to manufacture demand for loans for the pharmaceutical industry, which is now essentially entirely run by the state. So they end up breaking the bank.
Now, back to the debate. The topic was specifically about China, which I find to be very interesting because this is something that's been going on since mid 2015, if I recall correctly, and then went into 2016 about how China was starting to become a geopolitical rival. Now, we did talk about earlier how the state wants us to be afraid of COVID-19 and using that as the main source of anxiety by which they can use to justify their victimization of our rights to protect us. Well, they do the same thing with China as well. And in a way, COVID 19 is a proxy of China because you've seen it yourself, where both in this debate, the part a part we didn't show, but I saw it earlier on, and part of Trump's rhetoric is that this is that COVID 19 is the China virus. That's the term that they like to use. Now, that's true. However, it does showcase exactly what we're talking about, how they want to get people anxious, afraid, and terrified of China so that they can swoop in and just talk about how they're going to protect us from these bad, evil, horrible Chinese people. And let's be honest here, the Chinese government is absolutely evil and horrible. You have the Uyghurs being put into concentration camps where they're subjected to horrible conditions, and when they die, their organs are harvested and put onto the global organ black market, or I should say the red market. And you also have everyone remembers, what's it called? I'm blanking on the name.
Tiananmen Square massacre.
No, I wasn't thinking Tiananmen Square. I was thinking something that is true, but I'm thinking of something else. Uh, for social credit. That's it. Yeah, where they have the social credit system. I don't really think we need to go into detail about that and how they're trying to, and now they're trying to bring it into the West in the form of quote unquote contact tracing. I mean, it's gonna be
Trying to.
funny. They're trying to.
Oh, I mean,
They've got a lot of private companies in these quote unquote public to private partnerships. In other words, fascist arrangements to get a form of social credit installed into Western governments, and a lot of them are starting to experiment with it. I think I remember actually seeing in Thailand, which is not a Western country at all, but I think it's a pretty good example of they have schools now they have schools now, and some shops have these cameras that if they detect that you're not wearing a mask, they automatically lock the door and prevent you from going inside. And they're also starting to do this according to the comments section of that article, they're starting to do that in, what's it called, in Scotland as well, where if you're not wearing a mask, they just simply don't let you inside, which I think is a pretty interesting way to get out of school if you're in Scotland. But, I mean, yeah.
What just all that I was going to say is, there is effectively a social credit system that's alive and well in any state society, and it's the sort of thing I was talking about earlier. And that's what I think about that's what I think is interesting about the social credit score narrative is, the state likes to suggest that's not what our government's doing. That's what the Chinese government is doing. In reality, you have a sort of social credit score like system in existence. The moment that you sort of dichotomize a citizen from a non-citizen, which is sort of what is basically required um, by the state in order to even, in order to even, collect tax revenue.
Except nowadays they want to differentiate between citizens who do have COVID-19, citizens who might have come into contact with someone who had COVID-19, and someone who does not have COVID-19. And from
And
that,
it's
you'll have all sorts of special privileges, except you won't, to basically just have, we'll just differentiate, or we'll just dichotomize being a normal person who the government leaves alone, and those that we the government are going to give special attention to harassing.
I mean, it really is like a planned economy, just without every aspect of it being centrally dictated by the state. Like everything that people like are concerned about and complain about from an ethical standpoint about a planned economy, that's sort of what you have just with the existence of a state.
Mm-hmm.
The idea of an economy existing on a national scale, a lot of people don't even think about that, but every neighborhood, every street has a different market, has a different economy. You're telling me that one entire nation, which is just an arbitrary geographical area defined by legislative fiat, can all have these sort of uniform interests that people operate around? Obviously not. So that's a type of planning.
Well, forget about streets. Have you ever seen what kind of gifts people give each other during Christmas? Which is kind of relevant
Oh yeah.
because that season is starting to come up, and you can see, like, based on people's expectations and understandings of other people's interests, you can see just by observing it that individuals have their own economy within themselves. Every individual has a unique set of marginal preferences that are ultimately going to define their economic behavior. Now, their interactions with others are going to be as widespread or as narrowly constrained as they may choose, external forces like the state excluded. So,
So are you saying, heretic, that every time any policy prescription is quote unquote is issued by a government, that's central planning?
yes.
Yeah, literally.
I,
It is.
I mean, it's kind of funny to hear politicians, especially those who claim to be government skeptic, attempt to criticize others for being central planners, for being totalitarian, authoritarian, what have you, when they themselves are completely fine with doing exactly the same things. It's just that theirs is more Christian or more narrow, or it's less victimizing,
It's a
so therefore
free
it's not
market.
central planning. You see,
It's a free
so
market policy.
listen. It's whenever you have a tax rate or an income tax of 30%, that's central planning. But you have an income tax of 29.9%, that's free market. I mean, that makes perfect sense, doesn't it? Chat, does that make perfect sense? That as soon as you reach an arbitrary threshold, it ceases to be free market and starts to become totalitarian and vice versa?
The the logical hurdles that you have to throw yourself through in order to have a prescriptive view of just broadly the economy, quote unquote, as opposed to treating markets as though they're actual that's just social relations occurring between actual people. Well, no, you can't take that obvious route, because if you did that, then you wouldn't be able to have an argument for the state,
Oops.
because it would turn the study of markets into a social science, which would mean it's something that you could only observe.
God forbid we have a conclusion that does not allow us to centrally plan and control every aspect of everybody's lives. I mean, what would that be like? That would just be crazy. That would be anarchy, and we can't have that. Anyway, should we continue the debate? Because I think we're only like 3 minutes in. We're an hour.
Sure.
We're an hour into this. We're over an hour into the stream, and we're only like 3 minutes in. Anyways, continuing.
In all honesty, I've been kind of trying to delay the inevitable because I really don't want to. I don't want to watch the debate, but we'll continue.
Fair enough. I mean, of the little bit that I did watch, it was pain. That's all it was. It was pain. Anyways,
changes in the role of the United States in terms of global leadership over the past 4 years, and of course, times do change. What's your definition? We've seen strains with China, of course, as the Vice President mentioned. We've seen strains with our traditional allies in NATO and elsewhere. What is your definition of the role of American leadership in 2020?
So, Joe is, I love talking with Joe about a lot of these issues. And, Joe, I think he said it quite well. He says, foreign policy, it might sound complicated, but really it's relationships. So just think about it as relationships. And so we know this in our personal and professional relationships. You got to keep your word to your friends. You got to be loyal to your friends. People who've stood with you, got to stand with them. You got to know who your adversaries are and keep them in check. But what we have seen with Donald Trump is that he has betrayed our friends and dictators around the world. Let's take, for example, Russia. So, I serve on the Intelligence Committee of the United States Senate. America's intelligence community told us Russia interfered in the election of the President of the United States in 2016 and is playing in 2020. Christopher Wray, the director of the FBI, said the same. But Donald Trump, the commander-in-chief of the United States of America, prefers to take the word of Vladimir Putin over the word of the American intelligence community. You look at our friends at NATO. He has walked away from agreements. You can look at the Iran nuclear deal, which now has put us in a position where we are less safe because they are building up what might end up being a significant nuclear arsenal. We were in that deal, guys. We were in the Iran nuclear deal with friends, with allies around the country. And because of Donald Trump's unilateral approach to foreign policy, coupled with his isolationism, he pulled us out and has made America less safe. So, Susan, it's about relationships. And the thing that has always been part of the strength of our nation, in addition to our great military, has been that we keep our word. But Donald Trump doesn't understand that.
I'm sorry, but is our audience actually, are there people actually like begging to watch this crap in watching this stream? Like, I'm sorry if you're somebody who is watching and you were getting into this, but holy fucking shit, I am having a hard time like sitting here taking this seriously. We need to respect our allies.
Oh no, we can't have a dictator just unilaterally deciding foreign policy, even though that's basically what every single other president in American history has done.
We need to keep our enemies in check. This is
what we just need to have. Or these are just relationships, as though there was some equivalence between the relationship between me and Esso and the relationship between the United States and Great Britain, as though those two are somehow hegemonic entities, or some kind of singular, as though the United States and Great Britain, Iran, Russia, whatever, were just single entities that just met with each other and talked with each other the same way you or I did, and are not just arbitrary categories defined by government fee and agreed upon between governments and government fiat. So
Like
what kind of absolute nonsense and drivel is she trying to peddle? I mean, I know what it is. It's meant to be nice, very friendly sounding words that just make her sound like good and reasonable and kind and any other kind of stuff, but they don't actually mean anything, which I think is entirely the point. A lot of the terms that they use, and this is something we see in a lot of the other videos that we applied to in previous streams, that they use very vague terms specifically to obfuscate for the purposes of having the audience come to their own conclusions about what they mean. And then people take those conclusions that they themselves came to. They may not be the terms that Harris here is attempting to mean, but people take the term that they came to themselves and then project that onto what Harris is saying. And so the only way that Harris, for example, could be wrong is if they themselves are wrong. It's a very common and clear manipulation tactic. And I think it's the main reason that anti concepts are as prominent in rhetoric and discussion as they are. It's just persuasion tactics.
That's exactly why it's driving me so freaking crazy to sit here and listen to this, because they're not saying anything. It's a lot of nothing, but it's worded in a way so that the only way that you could derive any substance from it is if you are yourself projecting your idea of what like you said, you're projecting your own ideas onto what's being said. Politics is nothing more than just a giant advertisement for the state's legislative schemes as a way to try and trick you into thinking that it is something that is in your interest and that you asked for. And from my perspective, taking the libertarian approach to politics, which is to say I see it as being fundamentally disassociated from social organization, and social organization not really being entangled with the political fiat issued by the state. It drives me crazy to sit here and listen to this, because it's like I'm sitting here listening to somebody trying to get me to drop my guard, but it's not happening because I know I know that this person is a complete fucking snake, and I know that that's what they want me to do.
Now, one other thing I think is worth noting is you can see the caption where I paused it. What is your definition of the role of American leadership? Which really begs a whole lot of questions. Most importantly, what is American leadership? How does American leadership defined? Why America ought to be a leader? Who are they leading? What are they leading? What the hell does American leadership even mean?
What does it mean by leading? Going into Northern Africa and overthrowing governments that are trying to create gold-backed currencies.
Well, I mean, that you could argue that's leadership. Not to say that leadership is an anti-concept, but it is one of those things that has a very ambiguous definition, and there is a lot of debate in the business community about what the hell leadership even means, and what it means to show leadership. Does it mean to just yell at people until they comply with your demands? Does it mean being willing to take the blame for whatever happens next? Does it mean this or that? It has a whole bunch of other stuff. Like I like what Kevin Duggan just said now. Dugan, I'm probably pronouncing that terribly. Israel leadership? Yeah, why can't Israel lead the world, whatever the hell that means? Why can't Russia do it? Why can't Azerbaijan do it? Why can't Burma do it? Why does it have to be American? Is it just because you're trying to appeal to some vague notion of rah American number one? This jingoistic nonsense about how we absolutely have to be the best, even though leadership doesn't necessarily mean being the best either.
Well, another sort of interesting implication that one could potentially derive from this as well is that this kind of like, if the leadership, quote unquote, the direction that sort of the U.S. government takes is dictated by who wins the presidency. Well, then that would sort of implicitly push the idea that governments are interest neutral organizations, which, as Heretic and I have stressed in practically every edition of the Backalley since now, is something that the state desperately wants you to think, but it is absolutely not true, and there is no reasonable argument to be made to suggest that it is true.
I mean, you just need to look at everything that everyone who's ever had a debate when seeking government office have always agreed upon. They always agree that it is the proper role of the government to tax you, to take your money and use it for their marginal interests, to restrict your economic activity, to choose where you can and cannot travel, to license you, to restrict you, to basically make life as impossible, as unbearable to live as possible, or at least as much as they can get away with. And in this regards, like, can you really say that the state is interest neutral? Of course not. Its interest is in victimizing you. It's the only way that
And
they're able to maintain and sustain themselves. They may not hate you specific. They may not have any particular malice against you, whether you generally or you specifically, but it's very clear that their continued existence is only possible through parasitism. And guess what? You're the host.
yeah, speaking of hosts, the debate host in the framing of their question is also implying this idea. And Mike Pence earlier, when he was talking about the national interest of the U.S. government, is also sort of, implying this idea. So that would actually be a great example of a narrative which is sort of insinuated but is not directly argued in state propaganda. What a Heretic was talking about in the framing of their discussion and in the questions being asked, and you'll see this in a lot if you've ever had conversations with statists before. They tend to do this a lot, but they don't actually sort of like demonstrate that their arguments are true, and that's because they have sort of this view of society that societies are sort of dictated by the policy of the state and how the state chooses to enforce these legislative decrees. And but something that's happened because of that is you never really hear them explain what they mean or explain the function of how what they're arguing would supposedly be true. They just sort of say that the state needs to be powerful or needs to take charge or needs to have a hands-off approach, whatever that means. And, that will result in whatever conclusion they suggest that it would. But they just sort of say that. They never really demonstrate it because it's just sort of assumed that whatever happens to society is the result of whatever the state says it will be. And I think that is just, it's absurd that so many people actually think that. Even in the libertarian movement, you have like the political libertarians who shill for state policy and argue against anti-politics, essentially using that kind of argumentation, where they think of society as something that's prescribed, as opposed to something that sort of emerges out of people associating with one another.
I mean, can you really call political or the party archists libertarians, though?
No, but they attempt to argue for what they frame as libertarian principles, and they pay lip service to libertarian ideals. So that's why I'm addressing them as political, quote unquote, libertarians, because I acknowledge they're not libertarians. What they're arguing is it's not possible to reach libertarian conclusions, even in concept, with what they're arguing. But they consider themselves libertarians, and if you look up libertarianism, you'll find a lot of their material, the sort of the quote unquote secessionist types, or the people who use equivocation to argue that states becoming fractured into smaller states, multiple smaller states, that's an example of decentralization in the way that would have been described by the anti-political types.
All right. Now, unfortunately, I'm going to be starting this thing up again. Ready?
All right, sure.
Understand what it means to be honest.
Thank you, Senator Harris.
I'm just pausing here, and I'm actually a little upset that we cut it off before she could say that before. But it's always kind of funny to me, politicians accusing each other of dishonesty, the pot calling the kettle black.
Yeah, Kamala Harris saying anyone else is dishonest, like especially Kamala Harris, is fucking brilliant.
Oh, man. If you guys don't recall, she signed on to become the vice presidential candidate of someone who she, during the primary debates, directly called a racist and a rapist. And when called out on it, or when not called out, but when asked about it by Stephen Colbert of all people, she just laughed and said, "That was a debate. It doesn't mean anything." And then you have her trying to be a proponent of Black Lives Matter and being critical of police, while during her time as an attorney general was, well, not really a Black Lives Matter supporter. She was very happy to throw people in jail for victimless crimes, even calling for excessive sentences. She was very notorious for that. So it's kind of funny to see how she tries to position herself as anything except the totalitarian asshole that she knows she is, but she'll never say it out loud because, well, she needs to make the little people feel. She needs to make the peons feel nice and cozy and safe. Anyways, I'm gonna press play unless you have anything to add.
Yeah, it's not really surprising that she, as a state actor, would take this position of being willing to say or do anything, because literally the state is, in order for the state to function, it needs to slice throats and step on fingers of people who are sort of beneath their heels. But I mean, yeah, even for as far as politicians go, she's pretty brazen.
Indeed. Anyways, let's go.
Vice President Pence, let me give you a chance to respond.
Well, thank you. Well, President Trump kept his word when we moved the American embassy to Jerusalem,
Who
capital of the
cares?
state of Israel. When Joe Biden was vice president, they promised to do that, and they never did. We've stood strong with our allies, but we've been demanding. NATO is now contributing more to our common defense than ever before, thanks to President Trump's leadership. We've strengthened our alliances across the Asia-Pacific, and we've stood strong against those who would do us harm.
Strengthened our alliances.
What the hell does that mean?
And what is he even referring to there?
Do you have like a bi-weekly meeting where you meet at Taco Bell happening now every week? Is that what it means? Does that mean you give them more money in foreign aid?
This stuff like that is the reason why I sort of I tuned out a lot of state media outlets. In fact, I don't even really watch it anymore. My version of listening to the normie take on news stories so that I know what sort of narratives are being spun is like listening to Sticks, Hex, and Hammer or secular talk.
I always usually find it interesting to watch Fox every once in a while just to get an idea of what the state narrative is. It doesn't even upset me anymore. I just kind of listen to it to relax, if you know what I mean. It's weird.
Yeah, well, it's still this type of talking point. It's still in like the second stream type of personalities I was referencing earlier, who get like promoted by YouTube's algorithms because they incidentally happen to be promoting the same talking points as state media. But it's because they're not directly being managed by the CIA through Operation Mockingbird. It's toned down significantly, and their claims are specific enough that it doesn't drive me crazy. At the same time, don't drop your guard when you're like listening to that type of crap. Listen to that type of stuff to know what statists are saying, but take it with a grain of salt.
Yeah, that's fair. Though, I just want to comment on this real quick. This is not really important to anything, but is Mike Pence a weird-looking guy, or is that just me?
No, it's not just you. He looks like I'm trying. He looks like a mix between like Skeletor and Buzz Lightyear.
That is a very strange combination, but now that you pointed it out, yeah, I can't unsee it now. What the hell? Where do these people come from? It looks like someone just like injected molten plastic into his face and it's hardened into like a doll. And it's just like under his skin.
Kamala Harris is interesting too. She's kind of like she's a mix between the fat guy from Moana and the mom from Malcolm in the Middle.
I didn't watch Malcolm in the Middle, so I don't know what that's like. But to
If
me,
you know, okay. If you know, I'm sure people watching have seen it, but
she
I
looks
think it's pretty fucking funny.
she looks like a college. She looks like a cross between. Well, she has like a physical appearance of a college professor, but the demeanor of that know-it-all freshman college girl.
It looks like she eats bugs.
She probably does because the European Union probably told her to. Now, the European Union, of course, has no jurisdiction over her and can't ask her to do whatever she wants. But she saw the recommendation and was like, "Well, I'm going to do my part to save the planet." No, 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 no.
No, I meant like out of spite. She looks like the kind of person that would eat bugs out of spite.
Probably, yeah. Though I'm sure she probably ate some bugs because the European Union told her to. Anyways, I'm going to hit play. Let's see what other abject nonsense and drivel Pence has to say.
ISIS had captured an area of the Middle East the size of Pennsylvania. But President Trump unleashed the American military, and our armed forces destroyed the ISIS caliphate and took down their leader, al-Baghdadi, without one American casualty. Al-Baghdadi was responsible for the death of thousands. But notably, America's hearts today are with the family of Kayla Mueller, her parents of which are here with us tonight in Salt Lake City. Today, two of the ISIS killers responsible for Kayla Mueller's murder were brought to justice in the United States. Jihadi John was killed on the battlefield along with the other Beetle. The reality is that when Joe Biden was vice president, we had an opportunity to save Kayla Mueller. It breaks my heart to reflect on it, but the military came into the Oval Office, presented a plan. They said they knew where Kayla was. Baghdadi had held her for 18 months, abused her mercilessly before they...
I think you're trying to play something. It didn't go through.
I was trying to play audio of Skeletor.
Oh, can you try again?
Oh, I closed the tab already.
Ah, freaking hell.
But yeah, I really didn't want to. I didn't want to continue listening to that. So thought I would break the pace by doing something amusing, but
Yeah, that's fair. Let me see if I can't actually do it. But anyways, I do know about the Kayla Mueller situation. She was kidnapped by ISIS, held there for over a year, or probably even 2 years. She was brutalized, like just horrendously treated, raped, beaten, made as a sex slave, and then she was killed. And the U.S. military allegedly brought a plan forward to the Obama administration, saying that they know where she is. Here's the intelligence. Here's the layout. Here's the everything. Here's what we're going to do to get her out. And Obama turned it down because he thought it was too dangerous and he didn't want to risk American lives. Now that's just what they say. I don't know if it's true or not. You always should be very skeptical of these things. But yeah, the Kayla situation is genuinely tragic, and honestly, I don't think ISIS is going to be missed at all. But I'm
never
curious.
forget how the CIA armed ISIS and gave them $250 million worth of equipment.
It's kind of funny to think about how John McCain, before he was heroically slain by John McCain's brain tumor, was going on making the rounds through the media, trying to drum up support for getting money to the so-called Syrian moderates, aka ISIS, to get them not only money but weapons to help them overthrow Assad, which was pretty much the entire plan. And this, as you said earlier, the Central Intelligence Agency helped fund them, helped train them, helped finance them, and basically did everything they could to make sure that they were as powerful as they possibly could be.
And that we're not referring to the Mujahideen. We're referring specifically to ISIS as it was, referred to as ISIS. Because this was actually kind of a big story back in like 2013, 2014.
Mm-hmm. And then of
like
course you had what's it called? I'm trying to remember specifically. Oh yeah, there were several NGOs making the rounds that were also putting out propaganda in favor of the so-called Syrian moderates and the ISIS affiliated groups. Most notably, do you remember the White Helmets?
Yes, I do remember.
Yeah, for those of you who don't recall, the White Helmets were supposedly a humanitarian group who would go into war-torn Syria and provide aid and relief to civilians who had been bombed. When actual people on the ground, like actual people, not only people who were helping the volunteer, but the actual civilians, said that these people were liars, charlatans, and thieves. That they would loot. They would not only loot from corpses, but what they would do is they would bring in their crisis actors and they would take a photo op, like set their guy down who's all dirtied up. Guy would lay down, pretend to be harmed. They would make a pose as though they were trying to help him out. And then once a picture was taken, they would just leave immediately. And you knew that something was just a stunt the moment that the white helmets were involved and were photographed. And you could see this, for example, with the what's it called? You remember those so-called chemical attacks? We both did videos about that. The two times that it happened in 2017 and 2018, when supposedly Assad used chemical weapons against his own people, even though he clearly didn't. And we could reason out that he was the one who had the most to lose by using chemical weapons against his own people. It was very obvious that this was done by ISIS or any other group to try to frame Assad, and the Western government bought it hook, line, and sinker. I think I remember actually a few weeks ago that there was a clip of Fox News that I didn't watch on TV, but I saw it shared around about how Fox News anchors still believe that to be completely true, that Assad just used chemical weapons against his own people.
Yeah, we completely back in like 2018 when this stuff was supposedly coming out, we sort of trashed this narrative. And I think some of the videos are still up if you want to look through the Backalley Philosophy channel. around like the later part of 2018, you'll probably be able to find them. But I just wanted to I wanted you to put this picture on screen because I couldn't stop thinking about this as we were talking about this subject. At the end of the third Rambo movie, there's text that comes up like right before, I think before or after the credits. It says, "This film is dedicated to the brave Mujahideen fighters of Afghanistan."
Oh, I don't. That looks like it's aged worse than milk. And I actually don't know what's aged worse. I'm gonna have to need your help on this. Which has aged worse? Actually, give me a second to get that picture up because I don't have an image source.
I mean, it's pretty famous. If you just look it up, you can find it pretty easily. Brave Mujahideen fighters meme. But yeah, for those of you who don't know, the
All right, here we go.
Mujahideen was a CIA-backed group that the U.S. government was funding during the Afghan Civil War, when they when the Afghan government was trying to fight off the Soviet Union, and I think they were partially supported during the Gulf War as well, but don't correct me on that one because I'm not entirely sure. But the point is that the Mujahideen eventually became Al Qaeda, which eventually became ISIS. So basically, Rambo 3 is dedicated to ISIS.
Yeah, look at the picture and just which has aged worse. That picture, Bill Clinton in 1980 or 1996 bragging about his expansion of the Community Reinvestment Act, or Bill Clinton?
Bill Clinton looks like just a freaking corpse that they kind of just like shove a stick up his ass and are starting to just puppet him around nowadays.
The guy's a freaking zombie. I don't know if it's just like if it's a side effect of the what's the stuff called? Chroma something?
It's a side effect of all of the brown people's souls he's consumed.
He's slowly turning. He did brag about being the first black president. So he's slowly turning.
It's like that Joe Biden meme where he takes all the melanin out of that black girl's skin because she won't vote for him. Yeah, it's kind of like that. If you do that for multiple decades, it corrupts your body. It's like they're like living Sith lords. It's the dark side of the Force.
And there's also I also remember a similar meme. I think it was by the same guy actually, who posted a comic just like making fun of Biden's statement where he says 200 million people have died in America, and that time is now. And you just get Sith lightning everywhere. And yes, I did have to shout that. That was mandatory.
I wasn't expecting that, but fucking
yeah,
it's okay.
Oh, and by the way, I remember now. He's probably taking adrenochrome, which is honestly getting the appearance of a Sith Lord is probably a side effect of adrenochrome. So, anyways, should we continue our suffering?
I don't know. Does the chat want to continue, or should we continue? Like, I don't know, doing anything else.
Well, right now the thing about asking the chat is that there's a 7-second delay, so it'll be a while before they can actually respond. So yeah, let's just wait and see what the audience has to say. Do you want us to continue doing the debate, or should we? I don't know, talk about literally anything else because we're only like 7 minutes into this debate and it's freaking painful.
This probably would have been a lot better, honestly, if Radical Reviewer had come, because originally this stream we were supposed to get Radical Reviewer, which you don't know who that is. He's one of those bread tube guys who talks about like Marxist literature, and he's actually not like that bad of a guy to talk to. Like I obviously we don't agree with him on a whole lot, but we were trying to try out this new format where like we get people on who obviously have a lot of disagreements with us, and we find something that we know everybody would kind of would be opposed to the comment on, but at the same time would probably have like different reasons for why they object to it, and to then sort of like debate about those objections. The idea behind it is it's interesting to watch for like the same reason as those like spicy debate streams is, but also it explicitly disincentivizes political tribalism, or at least that's the thinking behind it. It's something that I wanted to try, and seems like a great idea. But anyway, one of the next streams we'll have Radical Reviewer on and probably talk about some like third positionist video.
Yeah. It probably would have been a lot more fun to bring him on for reasons that were previously described, and that's the reason why I titled the stream previously before I changed it just before the stream started. Because yeah, we had planned to have him on, but for reasons we're not entirely sure of, he'll probably tell us later. Yeah, he wasn't able to make it. So yeah, and just from what I can read in the chat, people do want us to continue.
Okay. Sweet. Sweet. I'm like screaming internally, but
yeah, I'm kind of just sighing with quiet resignation. So how about this? I'm just gonna go grab a bag of Doritos real quick.
Oh no! Don't make this like a lizard eats chips ASMR thing. I will leave the call if you do that.
Okay, fair enough. Anyways, continuing.
Killed her. But when Joe Biden was vice president, they hesitated for a month. And when armed forces finally went in, it was clear she'd been moved 2 days earlier. And her family says with a heart that broke the heart of every American that if President Donald Trump had been president, they believe Kayla would be alive today.
Thank you, Vice
Look,
President.
we destroyed the ISIS caliphate. And you talk about re-entering the Iran nuclear deal. I mean, the last administration transferred $1.8 billion to the leading state sponsor
Thank you, Vice
of
President
terrorism.
Pence.
President Donald Trump got us out of the deal.
Thank you, Vice President Pence.
And when Qasem Soleimani was traveling to Baghdad
Thank you,
to do
Vice President
harm
Pence.
to Americans, President Donald Trump took
Thank
him
you, Vice
out.
President Pence.
Yeah, I remember doing a video about this not long ago when this happened. I think this was in January, wasn't it? When Soleimani was taken out, the Iranian general in Iraq.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there was no proof whatsoever that he was planning an actual attack, and the people that were saying it, well, they have a long history of, well, lying about this kind of stuff. So we know that he was assassinated by, you have the usual liars, Mike Pompeo, what's his name, that evil mustached guy, Bolton.
John Bolton, yeah.
Yeah, the evil mustache guy. I like that name. Anyways.
But just what I was going to say is, like you'll notice that the debate moderator keeps trying to keeps essentially suggesting that they're like cutting Mike Pence off, like they're telling him, "Oh, your time is up. You need to stop talking." That's to try and get like the MAGA types looking at that and saying, "Oh, look at this media bias. It's so unfair." But in reality, if they honestly wanted Pence to stop talking, they would just cut his mic. So
that's true.
And they've done that before during past presidential debates. So yeah, the fact that they don't just do that tells me that they don't actually want to stop him from talking. They just want to get the MAGA conservative types up in arms about it.
Well, they're already up in arms. I mean, the narrative going around now is that she being a moderator, is writing a biography of Nancy Pelosi, which I'm pretty sure even people who aren't too familiar with the party hierarchy would recognize that name and would recognize that someone who is interested enough to be writing the biography of her isn't someone who's generally going to have a very favorable opinion of Donald Trump or Mike Pence. So that's already the case, so it's very easy to see how they're putting this forward. They're just being effectively consistent with the narrative that they're creating. Anyways, I don't really think there's very much to add about this. I'm about to hit to continue. Do you have anything to add?
No, I don't.
All right, so let's let our.
No, I said Mike Pence looked like Skeletor earlier. Nancy Pelosi, he's definitely got that thing going on for sure.
Well, I mean, I'm pretty sure her blood is pure adrenochrome at this point. The only reason that she's still around is so that they can harvest her blood in order to keep everyone else alive.
Do you think that might be a side effect of like whatever these like secret societies all these politicians are parts of, like the Skull and Bones, put them through in order to make them loyal?
Yes, because nobody else looks like that. I mean, you see, I can't imagine you're around elderly people very often, but you've seen them once or twice, and they do not look like politicians.
Politicians, like they uniquely have like a skeletal frame thing going on once they get up to their 70s or 80s, and it's even if you're around, like even at the store, other old people, they don't look like that. They still look like people, just like kind of maybe a little decrepit because their body is sort of declining.
Mm-hmm.
With politicians, it's like you could see their skeleton. It's freaky.
They just become walking corpses, whereas regular elderly people just look like people but shriveled and maybe a little hunched over. It's weird, but the thing with Pence is I'm actually kind of noticing this now. I'm pretty sure it's just Botox.
And that's part of it as well, because these people do a lot of things to their like bodies in order to try and, from their perspective, they think that it makes them look appealing to the eye at the very least, but in reality, it just makes them look like non-human, freakishly. Like some of them fall straight into the uncanny valley almost. Nancy Pelosi being an example of one of those people.
Mm-hmm. And now that I pointed it out, I think a lot of our audience is going to notice it as well. Notice how very little his face actually moves whenever he talks. Like the most facial expression I've seen him give is a raised eyebrow, and that's basically it. There's no other part of his mouth that moves when his mouth, or there's no other part of his face that moves when his mouth talks. Whereas if you observe anyone else talking, you will even be able to observe this with Kamala Harris. You'll see like their cheeks shift, maybe like parts below their eye will start to change. Their brows will furrow a little bit depending on what they're saying. There's generally a lot of movement, whereas with Pence, only his lips seem to move. It's very weird, and now that I pointed it out, I can guarantee you that no one in our audience will be able to unsee it. Anyways, I'm just going to keep going, and you'll be able to see exactly what I'm talking about.
And America is safer, our allies are safer, and the American people know President Donald Trump will never
Thank you, Vice President.
take action.
I would like to give Senator Harris a chance to respond, but not as much.
Holy shit, I never noticed that before. I never even noticed that, but yeah, his like the whole middle part of his face is completely still. There is so much Botox in that face. It's probably, oh my god.
This is something I noticed a long ass time ago. I think I even noticed it as early as 2004 when people were accusing Kerry of suffering from a Botox. and how you could see it because when their face just did not move. And so it's kind of something that I've come to pick up on as well. It's it's so weird. And of course it's not just politicians who do that. You'll occasionally see this with like other public facing figures like sports commentators, news anchors, and now that you can notice it, you'll never unnotice it.
Politicians especially do it because, a lot of their branding is their face. So,
God, I mean, it was just like I can't help but think like there's got to be some dignity in aging gracefully, just allowing your body to like assuming you can't become immortal. Then what you can at least do is allow yourself to become the more reserved, dignified elder statesman, and there is some dignity in that.
It makes sense to me that the most anti-human organization that's ever existed, the people who run that organization operate in a very anti-human way.
Mm-hmm. And also, judging by our comments section, it's very clear that since I played that clip, everyone else noticed it too.
All right, I guess we could keep going.
God, that is phenomenal.
There are other topics we want to talk about.
But I would like equal time.
Yes.
Thank you.
Please go ahead.
First of all, to the Mueller family, I know about your daughter's case, and I'm so sorry.
Oh my God! Did you see that?
No, I did not.
Okay, I'll play that. I'll play that back.
It's still that still that you had of Kamala Harris. Her eyes looked like a fucking chameleon. Like seriously.
All right, I
wish you'd kept it. I wish you'd kept it on that still, because I mean, I would have screenshotted it and like put it side by side with a chameleon because it looks so much like one.
All right. Since I'm now like hyper focused on facial expressions, this got me to look at Kamala Harris's facial expression as she was saying that, and it's not subtle at all. Just watch her face.
This is what we've been reduced
to reflect on it, but the military came into the.
I mean, let's be honest; it's more entertaining than what they're actually saying.
As for for sure, in terms of like entertainment value, but as for like actual substantive information and value taken from what's been presented here, let's be honest, you've probably taken away infinitely more useful information and narratives from what we've said than anything that's happened in the debate.
Mm-hmm. All right.
Unquestionable, but yeah, let's continue.
All right, so watch Kamala Harris's facial expression as she gives condolences to the family.
Oval Office presented a plan. They said they knew where Kayla was.
We got to go through him first.
18 months,
give it a little bit.
Mercilessly before they moved 2 days earlier. And her family says with a heart that broke the heart of every American that if President Donald Trump had been president, they believe Kayla would be alive today.
Thank you, Vice
Look,
President.
we destroyed the ISIS caliphate. President Donald Trump and America is safer.
I'm skipping
Our
ahead
allies
like
are safer.
10 seconds at a time.
No, President Donald Trump will never
Thank you, Vice President.
take action.
I would like to give Senator Harris a chance to respond, but not at such great length because, of course, there are other topics we want to talk about.
But I would like equal time.
Yes.
Thank you.
Please go ahead.
All right, watch your face.
First of all, to the Mueller family, I know about your daughter's case, and I'm so sorry.
What the hell? She's smiling. This makes her happy. What's up with that? I mean, I know these people are demonic, but good lord. I would think that you would be at least practiced. Like if you're a lying sociopath, you would at least be practiced in faking emotions. But no, she finds it funny.
That's what I was talking about right there. I'm glad that you paused it on this screen cap. She looks like a fucking lizard. Look at it. No offense, but yeah, that doesn't look even. It's freaking me out. This is like uncanny valley territory.
There's probably some plastic surgery that looks wrong at the wrong angle, and if that's probably what's going on, or the shape shifting is not working. It does break down in certain instances. I mean, I remember there was even a video outright of someone's eyes shifting towards like from the round human pupil to a slit eye pupil for just a moment. It was like on some Russian TV show, and it was really interesting, to say the least. It's probably very low, probably got some very low quality polymorphine.
It's probably a camera glitch, but I mean, the same thing happened to Nancy Pelosi back in like the end of 2018, but it only showed up in like one broadcast, but all the other broadcasts showed that it was just fine.
Probably it's something to do with the camera itself, and it breaks through the polymorphine. So
right.
yeah, so I just wanted to bring this to everyone's attention because I just find this absolutely disturbing and sociopathic that she puts people's condolences and she finds it funny. That's not just like I'm trying to be charming smile. That's like I'm stifling laughter. She doesn't care at all. Your family's dead. Haha. I just skipped back 10 seconds because I want to show it off one more time, then we'll continue.
I would like equal time.
Yes.
Thank you.
Please go ahead.
First of all, to the Mueller family, I know about your daughter's case, and I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
She is. She's like holding back laughter.
That is freaking I'm laughing not at the incident involving the Miller family, but just like how can anyone see that and not just think to themselves, wow, what an absolutely horrible person. And should I continue?
Yes.
God.
Her is awful. And it should have never happened. And I know Joe feels the same way. And I know that President Obama feels the same way.
No, he doesn't.
But you mentioned Soleimani. Let's start there. So after the strike on Soleimani, there was a counter strike on our troops in Iraq. And they suffered serious brain injuries. And do you know what Donald Trump dismissed them as? Headaches. And this is about a pattern of Donald Trump's, where he has referred to our men who are serving in our military as suckers and losers. Donald Trump, who went to Arlington Cemetery and stood above the graves of our fallen heroes and said, what's in it for them? Because of course, he only thinks about what's in it.
Imagine taking this seriously in 2020, seriously.
I mean, to be fair, she did bring up a good question. Go to Arlington National Cemetery and ask yourself, what did these people die for? What was in it for them? That's a question that I do genuinely believe is worth examining because you'll find that there really aren't a lot of good answers. Were they fighting for freedom? Whose freedom? What kind of freedom were they fighting for?
They're pawns being used by politicians in order to try and enforce the cartel policies that we were talking about earlier. That's all they died for. There's nothing even remotely noble about that. They didn't join the Great Fallen. They're worm food, and they're worm food because some politicians needed them in order to dispose of themselves, in order to try and maintain their power over society. That's all.
It's morbid. It's honestly kind of horrible to think about, but it is a genuine proposition, genuine question that people have to bring up, and it's the reason that it's horrible is just simply because once you start asking those questions, you start to come up with really horrible conclusions, just like the kind of things that you were just talking about, that they were suckers.
I'm not saying that because, I think it's good that they died. Like, please do not take that away from what I'm saying. It's just that there's a lot, especially in politics and state media, there's like a romanticization of the military and the police. And, there's an obvious reason for that. Well, it's both to try and otherize them, to put them into sort of an intangible, almost like fairy tale category of heroicism, but also it's to try and both disincentivize people from looking at them as enemies and to associate a sort of social category for them that makes them desirable to the exact kind of people that the state wants to be police officers, people who are interested in their own egos and people who will just blindly do whatever the state tells them.
Mm-hmm. If Donald Trump did say that troops are suckers and losers, he's not wrong, strictly speaking. Though if I were to hazard a guess, I'm going to assume, just because this is something I wanted to pick up on, that she's actually taking Trump out of context, and he was actually referring to one specific soldier. I don't know. I wouldn't know who, as a sucker and loser. Probably John McCain. Although let's be honest, the only real American hero that I can think of is John McCain's brain tumor. But
I heard that this quote supposedly came from like a writer who works at the Atlantic. But the interesting thing is, of course, it's not really substantiated by any sort of like recorded proof or transcript. But interestingly, what he's ascribing to Trump, asking what's in it for them and calling them suckers and losers, that's actually a quote from the second Godfather movie. And on top of that, the writer from the Atlantic in question, all he does is write about the Godfather. So I think it's equally likely that he just took a quote from the Godfather and claimed Trump said it.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's just like I'm just saying that we're not defending Donald Trump or dismissing the horror of what veterans and the fallen had to go through. But I think it does showcase very clearly that the extent to which people's interests are unable to be met because of these ridiculous narratives and people trying to create some kind of taboo against selfishness, they'll call it, because you don't want people to understand what their own interests are. Because if you do try to question and figure out what your own interests are, you just get labeled as selfish, as though we're some horrible pejorative. Whereas if people did make an honest examination of what their interests lie and what they are, they would find very quickly that, well, the state is nothing less than a parasite, a monster, something that is going to throw them away and dispose of them as easily as you might dispose of a candy wrapper.
Yeah, and that's sort of the point that I was attempting to make earlier. Is I'm not tearing apart that sort of romanticism to insult those people. I'm tearing that apart, because really that pedestal that the state has put them upon, and that people who shill for the state attempt to ascribe to them, is not really ultimately based on anything rational. But on top of that, it's destructive, because what it does is it sort of creates a sort of standard where the state's monopoly on defense, it sort of implicitly justifies that and creates a sort of pretext for it. And if you understand it this way, not just because of the fact that it's a lot easier to justify, and based on the organizational function of the state, it's the most accurate interpretation of the role of the military and the police within the state's sort of structure. But on top of that, it gives away a more accurate narrative of exactly where the state's security lies within the state, as well as what it does in society. They're just as disposable as soda cans. The state, if one of them dies, then they'll just get another guy, and he will do the exact same thing, and it will be like the other guy never even existed.
Mm-hmm. I actually remember this is actually reminding me of a conversation I had with someone in our Discord channel on a voice chat, where someone who served in the military, not the American military, but a different one. I'm not going to say who it is, but I pointed out this exact same thing. It's like you had that you were unfortunately made to serve a master who has no interest in your safety, and the people that you knew who were killed in action unfortunately died for nothing. And I'm thinking about it now, and it makes sense that he would have such a visceral, angry reaction to it, because essentially what you have is people who put a lot of their time and effort into being what the state wanted them to be, and you basically just have the sunk cost fallacy coercing veterans into thinking that it must have been worth something, right? All those people I cared about, all of that, all that I had to sacrifice, all of that suffering.
It must have been worthwhile because the cost was potentially being killed.
Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, being confronted with the reality that ultimately you were just pawns in a chess match between rulers, that's not something that even people who never served. That's something even people who have not served in the military have a hard time getting over. Imagine being
It's
in the
like
military and coming to that conclusion.
It's like that meme where you have like a castle and a military charging on two different sides of like a moat, and one of them is, I think, like the glorious rulers and the brave military. The other one are the disgusting brutes and the tyrannical dictatorship.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, that's effectively what it is. Think about it from, we're not putting down the U.S. military or police in the U.S. It's the same sort of social dynamics within any state society anywhere in the world. The people working in the state's security monopoly are treated the exact same way. And they look at the American monopoly on security the exact same way.
Mm-hmm. Now, anyways, I'm just going to hit continue here. You ready?
Yeah.
What's in it for him? Let's take what he said about John McCain, a great American hero.
She misspoke. I think she meant John McCain's brain tumor. Great American hero.
Yeah. Let's hear what she has to say, though.
And Donald Trump says he doesn't deserve to be called a hero because he was a prisoner of war. And this is very important when you want to talk about who is the current commander-in-chief and what they care about and what they don't care about.
Counter-argument.
Counter-argument.
John McCain is a scumbag who can go fuck himself. Continue.
Oh, no objections here.
That Russia had bounties on the heads of American soldiers. And you know,
that actually turned out to not be true. So I don't know where the hell she's getting that. I think she's deliberately trying to deceive people, actually.
You know what a bounty is? It's somebody puts a price on your head and they will pay it if you are killed. And Donald Trump had talked at least 6 times to Vladimir Putin and never brought up the subject. Joe Biden would never do that.
Thank
Joe
you.
Biden would, but Joe Biden would hold Russia to account for any threat to our nation's security or to our troops who are sacrificing their lives for the sake of our democracy and our safety.
Thank you, Senator Harris. This is such an important issue, but we have other important issues as well.
Protect the poppy fields for our democracy.
Protect those lying sociopaths and murderers for democracy. Be disposable pawns for our democracy.
Make sure that the World Trade Organization can enforce its policies and rates for our democracy.
Make sure that we're able to enforce our artificial scarcities and restrict the development of technology that could actually save lives for democracy.
Protect the petrodollar for our democracy.
Anyways, continuing.
I want to make sure we have a chance.
I really have to
talk
respond
about,
to that.
I'm,
Look, she has
15 seconds because
Well, I gotta
we're
have
trying
more
to
than
keep.
that. Look.
Well, I'm sorry, Vice President,
Look,
but you've had more time than she's had so far.
The slanders against President Donald Trump regarding men and women of our armed forces are absurd.
I'm sorry, Vice
My
President
son
Pence.
is a captain in the United
Yes.
States Marine Corps. My son-in-law is deployed in the United States Navy. I can assure all of you, with sons and daughters serving in our military, President Donald Trump not only respects but reveres all of those who serve in our armed forces, and any suggestion otherwise is ridiculous.
But
Let
thank
me-
you, Vice
Donald
President
Trump.
Pence.
Donald Trump doesn't care. Counter argument. Donald Trump loves them. I can tell you, Donald Trump personally feels that every single one of them are good boys and would give them good boy kisses if they come back home.
Donald Trump
This is-
actually goes to bed at night staring at pictures, a different one each time, of a soldier. And
This is
if
such
you
a
will,
low-level discussion. Honestly, it's just what is this other person thinking? Why the fuck should I care? Seriously.
because Orange Man bad, I guess.
Oh my god.
This is, I mean, we talked earlier in the stream about how this is the most consequential vice presidential debate in U.S. history, simply because it'll appear as a footnote in some history books. But I mean, I can kind of imagine that since it's digital, it's going to be archived for all intents and purposes forever.
That's
People are
the
going
only
to
reason.
people are going to watch this, or there's going to be like some historian in like the 23rd century who's going to go back, recover this archive footage, and then watch it, and they'll go through like all 90 minutes of it, and they'll just come out thinking, "What the hell is this? Is this what people actually thought back then? What the hell?"
This is the only reason that this will be remembered even remotely is just because it's more than likely going to be the last one in a society where the state has any sort of like social consequence. What the state does has any sort of social significance. I mean, in reality, and this is why I just can't with these political debates anymore. Like a good 25% of any debate, at the very least, and it's even more in older debates, you'll find, are just like what their opinions about what another person thinks is. I could not care any less. Seriously. It just isn't so unimportant. This is like e-news celebrity gossip tier shit.
And no, Grambo, this will not be the last and final debate in America's final existence. There's going to be like 2 more presidential debates, which of course we are not going to cover because those are also going to be an absolute crap show. Now, anyways, I'm going to continue here.
Vice
The
President
American
Pence,
people deserve,
know,
Susan,
Vice
the American
President
people
Pence, I
deserve to
didn't,
know.
Vice President
There's a
Pence, I did not,
pattern that you
excuse
can't
me,
deny.
Susan, the
I did
American
not
people
create
deserve
the
to know
rules for tonight.
Joe Biden
Your
and
campaigns agreed to the rules for tonight's debate with the Commission on Presidential Debates. I'm here to enforce them, which involves moving from one topic to another, giving roughly equal time to both of you,
right
which is what I'm trying very hard to do.
Go right ahead.
So I want to go ahead and move to the next topic, which is an important one, as the last topic was, and that is the Supreme Court. On Monday, the Senate Judiciary Committee is scheduled to open hearings on Amy Coney Barrett's nomination to the Supreme Court. Senator Harris, you'll be there as a member of the committee. Yes. Her confirmation would cement the court's conservative majority and make it likely open to more abortion restrictions, even to overturning the landmark Roe v. Wade ruling. Access to abortion would then be up to the states. Vice President Pence, you're the former governor of Indiana. If Roe v. Wade is overturned, what would you want Indiana to do? Would you want your home state to ban all abortions? You have 2 minutes, uninterrupted.
Well, thank you for the question, but I'll use a little bit of my time to respond to that very important issue before. The American people deserve to know Qasem Soleimani, the Iranian general, was responsible for the death of hundreds of American service members. When the opportunity came, we saw him headed to Baghdad to kill more Americans. President Trump didn't hesitate, and Qasem Soleimani is gone. But you deserve to know that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris actually criticized the decision to take out Qasem Soleimani. It's really inexplicable, but with regard to Joe Biden, it's explainable.
I just can't help but think of the audacity that anyone would care about what Soleimani did or did not do, which is not even clear if he was involved in any attacks against Americans whatsoever.
Not really any evidence for that.
And even if he was, his death count would be in the hundreds, which if you were to compare that to the topic that they just brought up just now about abortion, which, by the way, the overturning of Roe v. Wade would not make abortion illegal in the United States. It would just make it a state issue, which, although we deride and disregard the Constitution entirely, is at least more constitutionally consistent, assuming you care about that kind of thing. But that said, I would think that the abortion topic, which was that Planned Parenthood was founded with the express purpose of committing genocide against basketball Americans and has resulted in the deaths of tens of millions of unborn kids. I think that's a significantly more pressing issue than some Iranian general who may or may not have even killed 100 people.
Basketball Americans. I love that. I love it when I love that term so much.
But yeah, the point is that it's kind of ridiculous that we would focus on some guy who lived thousands of miles away when there are tens of millions of people killed over several decades as a result of not only it being of it happening, but it being outright subsidized massively by the United States government to the tune of 75% of Planned Parenthood's budget comes from the federal government.
It's hard to even really count how many people are killed by the U.S. government because there are so many indirect ways that the government does this, like OSHA mandating asbestos to be the insulation in their building codes for private contractors, and that there's this invention proposed in 1937 that was suppressed by the patent office, which would have put it would have deployed like a sort of cushy shield in front of cars, which would scoop up pedestrians as opposed to having them crash into the cars directly, which would significantly reduce mortality rates, but the state suppressed that specifically.
There's also, of course, all of the medicine that's restricted from being developed and being deployed into the United States because it's going through their because going through the FDA's 10+ year and multi-billion-dollar testing regimen, which was completely unnecessary. And to say nothing.
And then there's also all of the like indirect ways, the things that the state does that as a result could be argued that millions of people have died, like the supply manipulations in the political economy that's restricted the production of resources and limited who can have access to them.
Oh, forget about that. You can just look at things like DDT. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it was basically a miracle pesticide that existed a long time ago. Or like not really a long time ago, but it was like prominent in 30s, 40s, and 50s that was on the verge of wiping out malaria. Then after it got banned in the United States in the 70s, if I recall correctly, it resulted in a resurgence of malaria throughout the world that had resulted in hundreds of millions of people dying from a completely curable and preventable disease that was on the verge of being wiped out. All because some moron thought birds might have been getting cancer because
All
of it.
because politicians just need to have their state.
Guess so.
Countless untold literally we will probably never know how many people have been killed by the state because of just how like dubious it could be to even like measure the extent to which the state has manipulated society, but it's untold hundreds of millions of people have died because of things that the state has done.
And I think the United States government, if we were to even get an estimate, would probably start to approach, if not surpass, the billion mark. I mean, could the United States government be responsible for the deaths under Mao's government due to them effectively giving up that region of the world to the Soviet Union?
Anyway, are we gonna continue or stop here? Because we kind of run out of things to talk about.
Okay, let's continue, and we're probably going to stop at the 3 hour mark, so 30 minutes left.
Because history records
Okay.
that Joe Biden actually opposed the raid against Osama bin Laden. It's absolutely essential that we have a commander-in-chief who will not hesitate to act to protect American lives and to protect American service members, and that's what you have in President Donald Trump. Now, with regard to the Supreme Court of the United States, let me say President Trump and I could not be more enthusiastic about the opportunity to see Judge Amy Coney Barrett become Justice Amy Coney Barrett. Now, she's a brilliant woman, and she will bring a lifetime of experience and a sizable American family to the Supreme Court of the United States. And our hope is, in the hearing next week, unlike Justice Kavanaugh received with treatment from you and others, we hope she gets a fair hearing. And we particularly hope that we don't see the kind of attacks on her Christian faith that we saw before. I mean, the Democrat chairman of the Judiciary Committee before, when Judge Barrett was being confirmed for the Court of Appeals, expressed concern that the dogma of her faith lived loudly in her. Dick Durbin of Illinois said that it was a concern. Senator, I know one of our judicial nominees, you actually attacked because they were a member of the Catholic Knights of Columbus, just because the Knights of Columbus holds pro-life views and pro-marriage views.
Thank you, Vice President
So
Pence. Your
my
time
hope
is
is
up.
that when the hearing takes place,
Thank you, Vice President Pence.
that Judge Amy Coney Barrett will be respected,
Thank you,
treated
Vice President
respectfully,
Pence.
voted and confirmed
Thank
to the
you.
Supreme Court of the United States.
Senator Harris, you're the senator from and former Attorney General of California. So let me ask you a parallel question to the one I posed to the Vice President. If Roe v. Wade is overturned, what would you want California to do?
So, does anyone actually care about Amy Coney Barrett, whatever her triple name is?
No.
Yeah, I'm actually very tempted to just skip over for like 5 minutes. Would anyone object to
Yeah,
that?
I care about what another asshole wearing a dress who thinks that they're more important than me has to say about the Constitution, which where my interpretation is as valid functionally as theirs.
All right, so I'm just going to go ahead and try to skip forward some.
And people have voted.
Whoa, that was wrong.
People are in.
That was not far
people
enough.
who have been reviewed
Not close enough.
by legal professional organizations and found not competent, are substandard. And do you know that of the 50 people who President Trump appointed to the Court of Appeals for lifetime appointments, not one is black? This is what they've been doing. You want to talk about packing a court?
Oh
Let's
my
have that
God,
discussion.
who the hell
Thank you.
cares?
Thank you, Senator. Let's go on and talk about the issue of racial justice.
I just want the record to reflect she never answered the question. So
Thank
maybe
you.
the next debate, Joe Biden will answer the question.
Thank you.
But I think
Thank
the
you.
American people know the answer.
Thank you, Vice President. In March, Breonna Taylor, a 26-year-old emergency room technician in Louisville, was shot and killed after police officers
this ought to be
investigating a
good.
search warrant in a narcotics investigation broke into her apartment. The police said they identified themselves. Taylor's boyfriend said he didn't hear them do that. He used a gun registered to him to fire a shot, which wounded an officer. The officers then fired more than 20 rounds into the apartment. They say they were acting in self-defense. None of them have been indicted in connection with her death. Senator Harris, in the case of Breonna Taylor, was justice done? You have 2 minutes.
I don't believe so. And I've talked with Breonna's mother, Tamika Palmer, and her family. And her family deserves justice. She was a beautiful young woman. She had as her life goal to become a nurse, and she wanted to become an EMT to first learn what's going on out on the street so she could then become a nurse and save lives. And her life was taken unjustifiably and tragically and violently. And it brings me to, you know, the 8 minutes and 46 seconds that America witnessed, during which an American man was tortured and killed under the knee of an armed, uniformed police officer. And people around our country of every race, of every age, of every gender, perfect strangers to each other, marched shoulder to shoulder, arm in arm, fighting for us to finally achieve that ideal of equal justice under law. And I was a part of those peaceful protests. And
We have equal justice under the law. It's just that what the state does is not law at all. It's just the arbitrary opinions of, well, lying sociopaths.
And also, I'd like to point out that there is a heretic. I assume that you downloaded these those clips about the Breonna Taylor thing back when I posted them like a week and a half ago as well. But somebody posted like the leaked body cam footage of the raid on Breonna Taylor's apartment. And also evidence that the supposed defense attorneys for Breonna Taylor were essentially trying to intimidate people who were showing them around online into not talking about them.
Oh,
And,
sorry to interrupt, but it went much farther than that. They were outright bribing them. Someone posted a $10,000 check they received from that law office specifically for their silence.
Well, we downloaded those things, and we might make we could probably make a compilation of those or talk about them, I guess. But it looks like those are no longer on Instagram or Bibliogram. They've been scrubbed, as I suspected they would have been.
I wonder why.
If you look in the resources tab of our Discord server, you can find where we were talking about this, and also you can look at. I think there's a download link somebody created that might still be up. So yeah, if you're interested, go there for now. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to tell you where to find them, but I know they exist.
Basically, one of the things that happened is that a lot of the narratives that they wanted to push about the Breonna Taylor incident were not true. For one thing, well, whether or not the police did announce their presence is still unknown, since it doesn't show that incident.
It's not unknown. Louisville Metro Police Department, they put out the official warrant that they issued. It specifically noted that it was a no-knock raid. And the reason issued in the warrant was that no-knock raids are more effective because if they announce their presence, that allows them to flush evidence. So
I did not hear
the
that before.
police, yeah, you could find that it's pretty readily available if you were to try and look up the warrant. But it was released by the police department themselves. So I mean, unless the police department is lying about that part of the story, then yeah, we know as a matter of fact it was a no-knock raid.
And the fact of the matter is, like, if they did announce their presence, it means that the warrant's invalid, and and any arrests that were made were completely unlawful. And we also know from the videos that Esso was mentioning just a second ago that the police were effectively holding people against their will. That neighbor that they claim, who they used to corroborate their claim that the police announced their presence, was heard on camera begging to go back to his home. Which, by the way, this is an apartment complex, so there are multiple neighbors around. And if he's a neighbor, well, he can just go right back there. The only reason he wasn't is because he wasn't being permitted to leave. So what that tells me is that they were effectively holding him against his will. He was begging to go home, and he was almost certainly coerced into saying whatever it is that they wanted him to say. Probably because they had some dirt on him too. I don't know, or they could at the very least just claim that they smell marijuana and then just use that to, you know.
Seems like a pretty straightforward take based on what we know to me. I mean, if we saw, we have him on camera being coerced by the police and held against his will, and then all of a sudden this guy is corroborating their side of the story, which literally nobody else is. Yeah, it sounds like that's what happened.
Yeah, as I said before, the video shows clearly that the apartment complex has multiple doors in proximity, so that none of them heard it. It just seems somewhat pretty unlikely to me. Almost impossible, actually. So, anyways, should we continue? Because she's going to go on about George Floyd and about how the riots are peaceful protests.
George Floyd.
George.
Oh my.
George Floyd.
Yeah. Yeah. Have you seen the graffiti on that statue of King Louis that was in downtown Louisville? And somebody graffitied during one of those riots that happened shortly after George Floyd was killed, and they spray painted George Floyd on the, and it was hilarious. Like they didn't even spell his name right, but it was so comically wrong. I was actually there a few times since I've started living counter-economically. I saw that in person, and I fucking died laughing when we drove past it. It's like, you could probably look this up. Just King Louis statue graffitied, and
I'm pulling it up. I'm actually pulling it up right now, so people on stream will be able to see it. Give me a second here.
GOERG. I think is how they spelled it.
Yeah, here we go. All right, people watching the stream can now see it. Suffice to say, there's no literacy test for being part of the BLM movement, I guess.
Oh man, it seems like the kind of person who would be involved in one of those riots would. They're spelling it how they would pronounce it. It looks like
how.
And there's an E at the end of Floyd, which is also not right, but it's not as comically wrong as how they spelled his first name.
I actually heard that BLM rioters actually tore down the statue of a dinosaur.
Why?
I don't know. I don't know.
Those dinosaurs and their historic oppression of the black person.
Well, I mean, that dinosaurs did roam the plains of Africa, or rather the plains of Pangaea, which eventually split up to become several continents, including Africa. So because they were in Africa, they were oppressing the black man, preventing him from evolving. It was only when the liberation meteor came that black people were able to evolve.
The black aliens from space sent a meteor down to Earth to allow the black people here to evolve. Let's go full spirit science with our Afrocentrist take on history here. There were black people from space that also time traveled from the future back into the past to create the meteor.
They wanted to close the time loop to allow themselves to evolve. So it's kind of like the reverse grandfather paradox.
Or they existed in order to let themselves exist.
Anyways, I'm just going to take this off the stream right now.
All right.
I'm just taking the picture off the stream. The spelling was freaking. Oh, that is funny. Anyways, let's continue.
All right.
And I believe strongly that, first of all, we are never going to condone violence, but we always must fight for the values that we hold dear, including the fight to achieve our ideals. And that's why
We're going to fight to achieve our ideals, to fight to achieve our ideals.
I mean, I expect you can expect that sort of redundancy from me when I'm not really thinking about the grammatical structure of my sentences and speaking off the cuff, but for these sort of prepped speeches, that's pretty bad.
And you know that Kamala Harris got these questions long before the debate even started, so she had time to prepare what she was going to say. This is amateur hour.
Or it's just the state being really desperate and how desperate they are kind of seeping through a little bit.
That's fair. I'm going to hit play now.
Biden and I have said on this subject. Look, and I'm a former career prosecutor. I know what I'm talking about. Bad cops are bad for good cops. We need reform of our policing in America and our criminal justice system, which is why Joe and I will immediately ban chokeholds and carotid holds. George Floyd would be alive today if we did that. We will require a national registry for police officers who break the law. We will, on the issue of criminal justice reform, get rid of private prisons and cash bail, and we will decriminalize marijuana, and we will expunge the records of those who have been convicted of marijuana. This is a time for leadership on a tragic issue of unarmed black people.
So that the exact same things can happen.
We're just going to pretend to be a bit more compassionate about it. Now, what's funny is that I'm pretty sure everyone remembers Eric Garner, the large basketball American who was put into a chokehold by NYPD officers for selling cigarettes on the black market. He was doing nothing or he was accosted by police. He was accosted by cockroaches. He wasn't really being aggressive or anything, but he just was asking them to leave him alone. And then one of them came up behind him and put him into a chokehold where he eventually suffered a heart attack and died from the stress of the chokehold. And fun fact: chokeholds were already banned as part of NYPD policy, and the cockroach murderer who murdered him didn't even receive basic disciplinary action as a result of it. So yeah, these are basically just what the policies that they're proposing are at best just symbolic gestures.
Yeah, they still have a monopoly in arbitration and also, a security monopoly. So nothing's going to happen to them if the state just, decides that nothing's going to happen.
It's ultimately up to the discretion, or whether or not someone ever even breaks a quote-unquote law. is ultimately up to the arbitrary discretion of both officers and prosecutors. And
As for
Kamala Harris, being a former prosecutor herself, should be well aware of this. That if she could get anyone off of any charges at any time. All she has to do is decline to make the case or to even frame the prosecution case she's making in such a way that the judge would have no choice but to dismiss the case. It's really not that
as for
difficult.
I mean, oh no, he sold cigarettes. I mean, I think that the reason nothing happened to any of those police is just for the same, for the same, it's the same sort of mentality that went behind Ross Ulbricht being arrested. It was entirely a political move. It was to sort of make an example of them for being counter economists.
Yeah, and I think, is going to make things a bit more difficult for us in the not too distant future, and why people should be careful about who they do, who they reveal themselves to, who they associate with, and that sort of thing. And where was I going with this? One thing I did want to point out is that there is very much a strong relationship between prosecution offices, district attorneys, and cockroaches, in the sense that for prosecution and in that side of legislation enforcement, their careers depend on how many convictions they can get. It doesn't matter if the person is innocent or guilty. You just need the raw conviction rating. And police officers are very useful for that because they have this mystique of credibility and dignity that we were talking about, I think, an hour ago, in the context of the military, and that they have this automatic credibility that they can just present to juries, and it doesn't, and they can just blatantly lie about what happened and be demonstrably proven to be false based on video evidence where they say they did one thing and they clearly did the opposite. They can be made to contradict themselves fairly easily.
There are a
But the
bunch of
point is,
different
but the point,
There are a bunch of different standards that the state made up to basically allow police to get away with murder, and are so arbitrary that they could be cited, even when police have demonstrably lied,
Mhm.
as sort of a justification for what they've done. Like, the standard of being under arrest for resisting arrest.
that's
I think that's a pretty infamous one.
Yeah, and where I was going with this is that because prosecutors and district attorneys rely on police to bolster their careers, they kind of have a symbiotic relationship with one another. They look out, the police help them, and so the prosecutors are going to help them. So as a result, well, they do exactly what I described, where you not only have a conflict of interest where a mafia agent is under arrest and being prosecuted by a mafia agent. The judge is also a mafia agent, and the jury, while they may not be mafia themselves, are playing by rules designed by the mafia in order to convince a mafia-made man. Do you really think you're going to get anything that resembles justice as a result of that arrangement? Especially when the prosecutor, their career depends on that very same officer being able to testify in their favor when they can call upon them? Of course not. And because police officers are very insular groups and tend to look out for one another, if you fire, or if you get a conviction on an officer, it's going to have a chilling effect on that entire department to where they're just not going to help you in the future, and that's going to hurt your career. So you have very much a very clear conflict of interest there, where of course the officers have a license to kill without actually needing a license at all. They can just do whatever they want.
All right. Should we continue or?
Yeah, let's continue.
People in America. who
Thank you,
think they'll-
Senator Harris. Vice President Pence, let me pose the same question to you. In the case of Breonna Taylor, was justice done? You have 2 minutes uninterrupted.
Well, our heart breaks for the loss of any innocent American life. And the family of Breonna Taylor has our sympathies. But I trust our justice system. a grand jury that refused the evidence. And it really is remarkable that as a former prosecutor, you would assume that an impaneled grand jury looking at all the evidence got it wrong, but you're entitled to your opinion.
They weren't looking at all the evidence.
I think, look, and with regard to George Floyd, there's no excuse for what happened to George Floyd, and justice will be served. But there's also no excuse for the rioting and looting that followed. I mean, it really is astonishing. Flora Westbrook is with us here tonight in Salt Lake City. Just a few weeks ago, I stood at what used to be her salon. It was burned to the ground by rioters and looters. And Flora is still trying to put her life back together. And I must tell you, this presumption that you hear consistently from Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, that America is systemically racist. And that, as Joe Biden said, that he believes that law enforcement has an implicit bias against minorities is a great insult to the men and women who serve in law enforcement. And I want everyone to know who puts on the uniform of law enforcement every day that President Trump and I stand with you. And it is remarkable that
I want everyone who puts on the uniform of legislation enforcers to know that SO and I regard you as our enemy, and you will be defeated.
Edgy, but yeah, I second that take.
Let me see here. What else did I kind of tuned out some of what he said. The thing that actually I most notably because of his candle face, he was not able to giggle the same way that Kamala Harris did when giving condolences to someone else. Wait, hold on a second. Is that correct? Oh my God, it's true.
What?
There's a fly on his head.
Oh no. You gotta hope this debate ends soon, buddy. You're apparently it's not just Botox. It's like he's dying while he's on stage.
Oh no!
The insects are like, oh, it's
They can smell the dying flesh.
I can smell the soul decaying underneath his skin.
Oh no! Oh, that is. I can see. I only noticed it because Omen Rose in the chat pointed it out, and now that he's pointed it out, everyone is noticing it.
There's a fucking fly on his head.
It's kind of hard to see because it's like just to the right of the ellipses at the end of the video title, but between the title and the watch later thing. But yeah, it's oh man, that is beautiful. His brain is rotting. No, I'm pretty sure his soul is rotting, and Nurgle is trying to claim his prize. Only problem is that the adrenochrome is keeping his soul intact inside his body.
Because his fucking eye doesn't fall out in the middle of a sentence. Oh my god, like Joe Biden's dentures coming loose.
I'll give it a little bit of time. I'm pretty sure that's going to be the next big thing. And by the way, I'm remembering something else that Pence was talking about, and that is that the cockroaches are not racist. Strictly speaking, that is true, in that the arrest rates match up with the report rates, which just to say report rates are that you report a crime you call 911, you report the crime, police come over, they do an interview. It's like, okay, what happened? What was stolen? What did the guy look like? And part of that, what he looked like gives a racial description, and they archive what that racial description is, and you can get a general overview of how often certain crimes are reported to have been done by certain races. That does match up with the arrest rating fairly accurately within a standard deviation. So strictly speaking, it is true. However, it's also true that the arrest rates of minorities by minorities is actually a lot higher. Where if you're a black man being arrested by a black officer, you're more likely to, well, be arrested. I shouldn't have said being arrested by a black officer. I should just say, like, if you're in an involuntary encounter with a black cockroach and you are black, you're more likely to be arrested than if it was a white officer.
I mean, honestly, it doesn't really matter though. I've pointed this out previously that like stop and search policy and the sort of profiling standards set by the state could arguably be interpreted by some people in a racial way. It doesn't matter fundamentally because the fact that they're a monopoly, should scare people because of that means that they could do anything to you, and they'll never be held accountable for it. And I notice how on both parts here, on both sides of the discussion, that point is kind of undermined because as Kamala Harris, straight from the horse's mouth, as she put it, within this dichotomy is false. It's all about the arbitrary attitudes of police officers, when in reality, the actual debate is, the problem with state coercion and the problem with the state having a monopoly on security services and the sort of incentives that creates and the sort of the behavior that would naturally be disincentivized if people were able to defend themselves, that is not disincentivized because that factor is taken out of the equation. That's what the debate is about. But within the the state sort of controlled dichotomy, it's reform versus all police officers are good boys and all of them feel honorable and all of them are honorable.
And with that,
Whatever the fuck that means.
oh yeah. Now with that, I think it'd be a good time to start wrapping up the stream. So this is going to go down as the most consequential debate or vice presidential debate in history, although it will only at best be a footnote in some obscure textbooks in the distant future. It'll just be something that gets mentioned in a paragraph, and it'll be used as a reference to how it is that these lying charlatans were able to deceive so many people so often, and that was because of their use of vague language and useless platitudes in an attempt to try to score more brownie points than the other candidate. It's really nothing special, but I can say this with absolute 100% certainty. The winner of this debate was definitely the fly on Mike Pence's head.
Yeah, that was perfect. He's becoming a corpse in real time. I think that the real winner of this debate is the counter economists, because of the fact that this is going to be the last real presidential debate that has any sort of social significance.
Yeah, definitely. So with that, we're going to have another stream on Friday, and yeah, thanks to you for stopping by, and we'll see you next time. Bye.